Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Adults and Health Scrutiny panel this Thursday, the 14th of November. My name is Councillor Pippa Connor, and I'm chairing this committee today. I'm just going to go around and introduce all my colleagues, and then I think we just may as well just introduce everybody because we've only got one agenda item today. So I think that's probably sensible to do it all at the start. So as I've said who I am, over to my colleague, Councillor Brennan.
Councillor Brennan, I'm Councillor for Muswell Hill.
Tyann Curran, Woodside Councillor.
Shona Donovan, Councillor for Tottenham Hale.
Alicia Poku, Tottenham Central Ward Councillor.
Helena?
Neil Sinclair, Head of Finance.
Oh, can we just introduce Helena? Sorry, as the panel member. Sorry, she's just online. It's Helena.
Yeah. Hi, thank you. Helena Kania, co-optee to the panel.
Neil Sinclair, Head of Finance.
Jo Beatty, Interim Director of Operations in Social Care.
Lucia Desneves, the Cabinet Member for Health, Social Care and Wellbeing.
Beverly Tarker, Director, Adults, Health and Communities.
Sarah Sutton, Assistant Director, Partnerships and Communities.
And I'm Dominic O'Brien, Scrutiny Officer to the panel.
Excellent, thank you. Just to remind everyone that this meeting has been filmed or recorded by the Council for live or subsequent broadcasted. So anyone in the room is agreeing or online is agreeing to have their comments recorded for this meeting. Any apologies for absence?
No apologies received, Chair.
Thank you. Any items of urgent business?
No items.
Declarations of interest from anyone? On finance? No. Any deputations, petitions, presentations, questions?
No, none received.
Right, so we move straight on to the minutes on pages 116. So this is where we look to approve the minutes of the previous meetings, but it's also an opportunity to ask any questions or have any clarifications around the minutes that we had previously. So I'm just going to look to colleagues if there's anything they want to raise about the minutes. I just wanted to note in the minutes that we asked on page 27 questions following how engaged scrutiny panel regarding continuous healthcare funding. So we had an explanation on point 4 around some figures, and I've gone back to ask for further data on the numbers of people receiving continuing healthcare financial support compared to other areas in the country and the finances attached to those. So we're still waiting on that reply, but that's to come. And then one other thing that was mentioned in the minutes, there was something about the Scrutiny Cafe, and obviously we've got our recommendations, but they'll be in the work programme at the end of the meeting. So that's in our work programme. So that's where that information will be. So with that, can I agree the minutes? Agreed. Okay. Okay. Right. We've got the action tracker on page 17 to 132. The reason it's so long is because there's all the information about the continuing healthcare assessments on there. So any questions on that? No, everyone okay. So we've got appointment of non-voting co-optee member. Dominic, do you just want to briefly update the panel?
Yeah, so just to update the panel, we had further conversations with the proposed co-optee, and the current intention is to bring that report to the December 17th meeting on the basis that it would provide a time for opportunity for some training, and also it's best to join a meeting that's a regular meeting rather than a budget for the first meeting. So so that was the decision that was made on that. So there'll be further update on that in December.
Thank you. Excellent. Right. So we are now going to move to agenda item 9, which is scrutiny of the 2025-26 draft budget, the 5-year medium-term financial strategy 25-26 to 29-30. This is to be found on your pack pages 133 to 198. Within that, so when we start on the main bit, we'll go through in stages. We've got the main report scrutiny. Then we've got the draft budget report to Cabinet, where we will just be looking at any areas that are pertinent to adults and health in that. So any information that you want clarification on that you haven't answered, that wasn't answered in the previous section. Then we go on to Appendix 1, which is the forecast budget pressures. That's on page 175. Then we go on to Appendix 2, which is the forecast savings. That's on page 177. Then Appendix 3, proposed changes to capital programme. That's page 185. And then Document A is the scrutiny role, and Document B, Part 1, is our savings tracker on page 193 and on. And then that's. So I'm going to hand over to Neil, who's going to give us a brief introduction to the budget today. So I ask you to sort of set it a little bit within the wider area of the council, especially within the cabinet report information, but then also obviously to focus in on adults and health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously we've had the cabinet meeting on Tuesday night. It set out the most recent update in terms of the council position. So I'll just sort of reiterate some of the key points from the paper presented this week. So as you're aware, we started the planning of the medium-term financial plan for this year with a budget gap of 14 million. So that was an opening position. In terms of pressures, we recognise that adults, housing demand and children's areas of most demand have created new pressures, which has increased pressures to about 51.4 million. We recognise that, and you'll see in the papers that there's a pressures bid, things that are unavoidable for adults, which totals around 15.1 million. So that's recognising the position in year, what we reckon is our best estimate based on information as it stands, and we'll come to that separately. We also have choices about growth, and growth obviously is something we can decide to include in our pressures or include in our budget planning or not. We also identified a number of savings management actions. So that's helped identify opportunities to reduce the gap to our current position of 32 million. So as of this week, we're working with a position where we still have not closed the gap, so we don't have a balanced budget, and it's sitting at approximately 32 million. So there's further work ahead of us to actually undertake further work across all the services to try and reduce that gap and deliver a balanced budget. So that's kind of the key next stages. Obviously, there's risks in terms of we've identified so far. As I mentioned, we've got some pressures coming through from a number of these demand-led services. Those pressures are not fixed, they're variable, and I think we recognise that in setting the budget for 24-25, we made an assumption of pressures at that point. We've been proven that those pressures have changed, and that's recognised in the demand-led services we're dealing with. Nothing's fixed. The demand for those services is moving all the time. So that's also recognising the numbers, but also recognising the price in the market we're paying for some of those services. So there are significant challenges there in trying to estimate what the future looks like based on history. And we are in a market where I think we'll perhaps cover it later, is that we're very much in a provider market-led market in terms of how much you might choose to pay. So we have risks around inflationary uplifts that are a major challenge. Obviously, we've got risks because we need to find a way to close the gap. So that's one of the big issues we've got to try and deal with. So, and obviously that gap is increasing going forward. So by 26-27, the current estimate is that gap might increase to 132 million. So there's significant work ahead of officers and the council to find a way to try and close that gap. So that's the key challenges that the council's facing. Obviously, we have got the detail in terms of budget announcements. We've had some headline numbers as part of the budget 2 weeks ago. We obviously will like a detailed financial settlement in coming weeks. That'll help us understand how that flows in terms of additional funding to the council, and obviously we'll then refresh our financial position on the back of that. So that in terms of affecting the revenue position. In terms of the capital programme, obviously we're recognising the fact the capital programme needs reshaped to reflect affordability. So there's been a number of changes to the capital programme, and those are set out in the documents attached to this the agenda. So it's recognised that some changes, so we have to recognise that programmes we don't see going ahead or have any requirement to go ahead because they don't deliver effective value for money. So we're looking to reshape the programme across the board, and obviously that's affecting some particular schemes within adults in health. So these are the kind of key things that kind of have reshaped the programme. So we have got to a position where at this stage we've got a gap remaining in the revenue budget. We have to deal with that gap going forward, and we've obviously got some hard work and hard decisions ahead of us in the coming weeks. So that's my opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for that very helpful summary of the position that we're currently in. So as I said to colleagues before, we're going to start on page 133 in the pack, which is the report, which is to adults and health. So actually, sorry, Councillor Mason, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself? Sorry, do you want?
Sorry, apologies for lateness. I was actually in a meeting, but yeah, I'm Mary Mason. I'm the councillor for Powys Green.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to start with an opening question, then I'm going to look to my colleagues to sort of come in on after that. So at 5.3, sorry, just before that, I just wanted to mention, so I know it's 5.9, so it's slightly skipping ahead, but you mentioned, Neil, the budget for next year has a £32 million gap, so the 25 to 26. So at the moment, we're struggling to do a balanced budget. How do you feel that we're actually going to be able to mitigate the risks not only this year to our budget, but also in the following year, knowing that within this report, and as you said about the demands, and we won't go through this because we know what those are, unfortunately, now in adults and health, adult social care. So because of those pressures, how do you think that we're realistically going to be able to reduce that budget pressure in adults and health to help bring down that gap of the 32 million in the next financial year? Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's probably a finance answer to this. There's probably then a service answer to this. In terms of finance answer is the modelling we have undertaken to date reflects our current in-year position in terms of forecast demand for services and the forecast cost of those services. The number in terms of the 15.1 million and the wider pressures that are included in the council MTFS at this stage are likely to change because we will keep updating those based on the best available information. So in terms of mitigation, we recognise that the pressures are not steady or stable. And I think that's the big challenge, because we know that nature of the client groups we're dealing with, whether it's in adults or the children's or whether it's in housing demand, that cost is just fluctuating all the time. We are putting our best estimate, and we've improved our modelling. In housing demand, we've improved our modelling in adult social care, and there's a number of controls in children's social care as well. So those are improving. That won't stop the numbers of people coming through the door, and won't stop providers asking for increased prices. I think the service may have a view on how they're dealing with the mitigation and what's happening at the front door and the market management.
Does anyone want to comment on the sort of actual service delivery side of things?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I know it's sort of focused on adult social care, but I think it's really important to stress the fact that the chief exec actually sees the pressures in the high demand services as areas for the whole council to address. So I think that's really welcome. So it is not about what is adult social care going to do about adult social care pressures only. It's really around what is the whole council going to do to mitigate these high demand areas, whether it's children's social care, adults or housing demand. I think that's just a really important. So when we look at the 30-something million gap. That does not just rest on adult social care. I think it's really important. So there's sort of three approaches. There's something around the basic housekeeping and really interrogating every line of spend for the council. There's something around improved efficiencies and ways of working, and how can we develop strategies to actually develop more value for money ways of working and outcomes. And thirdly, there's the transformational sort of aspect. And as we know, that latter aspect can take some time to actually bed in. So the immediate challenge is really about the pressures in this year and the pressures for next year. So there have been stringent controls put in place in terms of any council spend. And we are adhering to those, and there are regular reviews of how that is advancing the situation. I could talk about the adult social care, but I think we're going to get down to that. But I just thought it was really important just to stress that that 30-odd million is not just an adult social care challenge. It's a whole council challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to look to my colleagues. I've had Councillor Horan and then Councillor Mason. Thank you.
I'm not sure if this is the right time to talk about demand. Is that okay? Look, I think that the challenge we can see, and we've discussed this before, is how do you accurately predict demand going forward? So, you know, and we seem every year to not quite get that right. So I'd like to know essentially, what is the trend showing you now in terms of demand going forward? Is it flatlining? Is it is it going at a higher pace? So that's question number one. What you, in terms of your future prediction, where have you put demand? Have you looked at it in a conservative way of looking at in the future, and have you put some mitigations? Second point is, what are we doing to maybe control that demand? I mean, that may be another way of looking at it, to say that actually we've only got this amount of capacity within our council. Is there a way of managing that demand, and what are you doing to manage that demand? Thank you.
I'll start off, and Neil can come in because I know he helps us very much in terms of our trends and forecasting. So I think it's fair to say that it's useful to separate older people 65 plus from under 65s. And in terms of older people, for a number of years, actually, the graph was flatlining. And I think we might have discussed this here previously. However, in recent times, we've seen a significant rise in the trajectory of older people, both in terms of numbers and in terms of complexity of care needs, which again, I don't think will be a surprise to you. It's a national picture. In recent weeks, because obviously we monitor this monthly, we've seen that older people's line just slightly leveling off. So that's really, you know, if I'm trying to graphically describe how it's been over the last couple of years in the last few months. Now, I believe when we did the forecasting for older people last year, we did not take cognizant of the significant waiting lists we had for Care Act assessments. We have made a really concerted effort this year to really reduce those waiting lists. And I believe that's why we've had the spike at the beginning of the year. And we're getting through that sort of backlog, if I can call it that. And now it's trying to level off. So I think going forward, the likelihood of improved accuracy in terms of our forecasting is something that I think that's within our grasp. I think the other thing to say, just in terms of those trends, in terms of increasing numbers and complexities of older people, it is not just Haringey, it is a national picture. And then we turn to younger adults. And that really, I would say, is the real challenge for us in terms of, so there's a really positive picture around younger adults with statutory needs. They come into the service usually at 18 and they're there for a significant length of time, and people are living longer because of improved healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So there is just something around that increase in trajectory that continues to be a challenge. And I think the other area is that collectively, I don't think, and this is not just Haringey, but the ability to manage the provider offer for those younger adults is as effective as we would want it to be. So that remains a challenge. It's quite a niche market, especially when you talk about learning disabilities and challenging behavior. And we work, as I think I've talked about this earlier, across NCL to actually come together as a 5-borough local authority to try and manage that sort of interface with providers. It is very effective with older people. So we're able to keep our pricing for residential and nursing care agreed. Apart from some blips in the system that we've experienced this year, if I must say so, when contracts come to an end, providers feel they have a license to then renegotiate at very high costs. But with the help of NCL, we're trying to manage that. But I think the younger, learning disabilities and mental health, that is a market, an area that I think is not as effective really going forward. I don't know if you want to add anything, Neil.
I think it probably covers most of it. We do look at other data sets. We look at Office National Statistics data sets to make sure we understand wider population trends, but also look at any health data as well. So adding to Beverly's point about acuity of need or complexity of need, we're obviously looking at other numbers to try and make sure we reference those as well. But the difficulty is that when perhaps population statistics suggest that our numbers of younger adults wasn't increasing over the last few years, we were seeing locally an increase. Conversely, we were seeing, expect to see an increase in older adults for the last 3 to 4 years. We weren't. So it's one of those things that depends on practice. It depends on what's happening as the front door in terms of our support to those and offer to those people at all ages. So we do track in a lot of detail, not just at older adults, younger adults. We look across those with mental health needs, those with learning disability needs, to understand the implications, and also implications where we look at joint funding as well, working with health colleagues. And that can be a challenge as well, because we obviously ensure that where possible, health needs, whether identified, are properly funded by health ICB.
So sorry, Mary, Councillor Mason. Just before I come on to your question, I just want to pick up on Councillor Haran's question, because he made a really good point there about that projection and how we have the confidence. So in the future numbers. So last year, we were not predicting. So when the budget closed in March last year, well, in 2024, the update showed an estimated, now it's a £40 million gap across the piece for 2025-26. Now, obviously, we know that adults and health has gone up within that bit now, which is now 32 as the gap. So I think what we're asking really as a scrutiny committee is around the confidence in the future sort of grip on the commissioning and the procurement side of things. So you've mentioned the pressures in that, but what confidence can we have as a panel that whoever's looking at that commissioning, whoever's looking at those pieces of work, that procurement, are there new people being put into that to really focus in that area? What's the resources the council's able to put into that in order to ensure, as you said, trying to keep those costs stable so we don't have these escalating costs coming in?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So when we were preparing for sort of budget this year, we carried out a benchmarking exercise of our statistical neighbours in terms of unit costs of care. And obviously there's always a kind of a year lag. So I think that was 22-23. And we performed really well with our statistical neighbours in terms of the cost of care, i.e. how well value for money. the challenge then was the numbers of people. So if I'm looking at the league table, I think we were probably about 4th or 5th in terms of unit cost of care. And that obviously focused our attention on the fact that it's actually the numbers coming through. Having said that, this year, there is a trend, and I won't have the stats to confirm that until we have, you know, the publications, to suggest that actually from our day-to-day interactions, our commissioning interactions, the cost of care is actually increasing significantly. And I won't mention any names. There's a particular provider that actually, when the contract came to an end, increased costs by 36%. I just give that as an example of how the market is actually reacting in recent times to the challenges that we know they're all facing. And obviously, we're not in a position to adhere to that. I think the inflationary increase was 4%. Was 4%. So to have that at the end of a 3 or 4 year contract and then said, oh, well, is quite a shock to the system. So going back to your question, of course we need commissioning, robust commissioning activity to manage those kind of challenges that we're experiencing. And at this meeting previously, I've talked about the NCL arrangement to support market management. I think that continues to work very well, and it's certainly supporting us in the case of this individual sort of provider. But as I've also indicated, it's the younger people's market I think we need to focus attention in. And there's one area that we have to really focus on is the market management for younger people's provision. And we've recognised that, and there are plans in place to look to see how we can take forward strategies to address that. Accommodation, as you know, it's very often something that drives up costs. Where can we use our own provision to support younger people in supported housing and etc. And one of the really useful conversations we've been having with our housing colleagues is to see the needs of people who require social care, just like any other residents. So you have a housing delivery plan for, I don't know, X thousand. Well, actually, within that, there has to be specific delivery provision for specific needs. You will be aware of the bespoke housing program, which tends to focus on physical needs. What we don't tend to, up to date, but we're certainly wanting to take that forward, is people with behavioural needs. So that kind of bespoke. So those are the kind of conversations that I think, and just looking at other boroughs where they've been more successful in supporting younger adults, I would think it's the interface with housing, is how we can get accommodation into the sort of psyche of the whole council, and how we can then go forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, been waiting very patiently.
Your questions always. Thanks a lot. And thank you very much, Beverly, for the report and for the detailed outline, Neil. It's really useful. Yeah, we're all in a really difficult position. I think we just need to acknowledge and accept that, and to recognise that we're not going to get everything that we need, but that we need to make sure that we get what we need. So I was also impressed by the fact that you were talking about basic housekeeping and interrogating that and all spend, because undoubtedly there are areas that we can make savings in that. There always is. And by doing things more efficiently and smoothly, we definitely can create some savings. One of the issues that I'm troubled by is a report that went to audit, which I don't even know if I'm allowed to say, but where there was a problem in one of the areas of social care, not adults, with how records and data was kept and how we recorded cases and how we then reviewed them. And to me, having run a kind of, not as big as Haringey, but having run a social care project, I do think that if you don't get your systems in order, you leak money. You just leak it. And it's not because you're leaking it because you're doing bad things. It's because you're not doing the right things or the good things. And I think that having systems is essential. And interestingly, I know that Haringey is really good in keeping the voluntary sector in order in terms of us being, or as I was, being efficient, and they would pull you up if you weren't, quite rightly. And so I just think maybe we could pull ourselves up in adult social care, make sure all those systems are in place so that we can identify what's happening. But then you went on to me, which is equally as important, to talk about strategies and how we can be more strategic. And again, I was really pleased for you to be talking on the one hand about adult social care, on the same hand children's social care, and on the same hand housing, because unfortunately, certainly I have as a council, and I imagine my co-councillors here have experienced huge disconnect between the three. So we now have children who are living in one room or one bed flats with 3 or 4 siblings who have got different kinds of stresses, for example, autism, mental health difficulties, and you can just count how many years it's going to be before they will also be knocking on the door of adult social care. Because what is the trajectory for a 9-year-old who shares a bedroom with 4 siblings where they're all in one bed and one of them is autistic and another one has mental health needs? We don't need to write the prescription because it's there. So that's one of the things that I feel, I could give you 10 families in that situation living in Bounds Green at the moment. I could give you the list. And if we added that up, then we would have the same list. So we'd have, other boards would have the same list. So I think that has to be a real look at prevention and early intervention between the 3 different departments, rather than any single department being highlighted. We need that look. And on the other side of it is people who are just about coping, and they're elderly and a bit frail and just about coping. And then you see them just going down and down and down because there aren't the local services in place to support them, to give them. People come to a food bank in order to meet other people and be sociable. It's not okay. They might come for food, that's fine, but to be sociable, what are we doing that's wrong? Because if you don't provide something for people in the community, then, which is very cheap to provide, then what is going to happen to those people in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? Of course, they're going to be knocking on the door of adult social care. So I think that where we're looking at making savings, the areas of making savings must not be in prevention and early intervention. They must be in us working together across the departments, identifying where there are problems and focusing on the cases where there are problems, not just on, oh, that's an adult social care, but the whole case, and that we need to really drive our services in that way to accomplish savings, but savings which are going to be for the benefit of people, not for the detriment.
So, Councillor Mason, just to be really clear, because there's an awful lot in that, what specific questions did you want to put to officers, either in the finance or the service bit? Because you covered a huge range. I'm just seeing where your focus is, what specifically you want them to answer.
Ask you a few questions.
Just be really precise on this one. Thank you.
Side.
Very precise.
I promise you I'll make it into a question. Okay, so number 1 is what savings do you think that you can accomplish when you're talking about the cross-cutting savings? Because I've noticed on the data that we've had that we've got a generalised cross-cutting saving, and I'm not quite sure what that means. And so it's about, and also, will savings secure and keep prevention and early intervention services? And is there a way we can expand those in order to create a less demand in the higher need? So that's number 1. And that's about cost. Number 2 is in terms of the working together with housing and children's social care and adult social care. How do you propose this can be improved in the future? I know you're doing the work. I really know that you're focusing on that. So I'm not asking you to focus on it, because I know you are, but I'm asking how we can improve that in the future. It's done.
Didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm just making sure we are sticking to questions so that excellent. Right, okay.
If that's all right, Chair, and then I'll leave the technical details to the team. I think actually we've really recognised in the council that closer working between children's social care and adult social care and housing is all important, and I think we've seen some structural changes within how those teams work together over time, and we'll continue to see that will bring those areas of work closer together and help them work more closely and make sure that we don't have silos and we don't have miscommunication. Of course, the challenge is that every area of the council is under pressure, and no matter how much, as fast as we can build, it isn't enough. So I think that's a big core challenge. So we need to then prioritise. So if I then take that on to prevention, building on what Beverly said, I think really important to think about in our housing delivery programme how we can prioritise prevention of some of the issues you're describing, and focus in some of that accommodation on some of the highest need and some of the biggest pressures, both budget wise but also in people's lives. And I think we've started that journey, but that's an ongoing project. I think there's been a lot of close working between children's and housing on some of that front. Not to say that everything's perfect, absolutely not, because things are immensely challenging, as you all know, around just the paucity of good accommodation generally. But that work's ongoing. So an absolute commitment, I think, to that, and the reassurance that that's on the table, especially that cross-working piece, because I think you've heard me say before, I think we can be successful as individual teams, but I think I said something like where the magic happens is when we work better together. That's going to be something we have to get up every day and ask ourselves, how can we do that better? But it's very visible and very much a priority, I'd say, and you'll see that in some of the emerging changes to structures and how the work between those teams is evolving.
Thanks. So I think Councillor Desnes has said it all, but I suppose I wanted to specifically address the question about early intervention and prevention, because I absolutely agree with you. If we don't, in terms of the long-term sustainability of adult social care, we have to have a focus on early intervention and prevention. And I think there's some excellent examples that we have of how we're working in that space. However, I do have to reiterate the message. We have statutory duties for eligible people for adult social care. And at the moment, our budget is not sufficient for us to cover those statutory needs. We are therefore overspending on meeting those statutory needs. So something has to give. It's a very clear message. Where, 30 odd million is no small figure. And, we've done a lot of work to make sure that we have improved our ability to sort of forecast the demand pressures that are coming through. And that is for statutory adult social care. And we don't have the money to meet those needs. That's a fact. We are overspending. We meet them by overspending. So to maintain that twin track, meeting statutory needs, as well as what should be required for early intervention and prevention, is a really difficult balancing act. So I just really want to make that clear. It's not that we don't want to do it, but we are extremely challenged.
Thank you. I think I'm going to turn to Councillor Donovan. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Obviously, there's this £32 million gap, and we'll be talking in further detail later on in relation to possible savings. There's also the government have announced £1.3 billion of grant funding, of which 600 million is earmarked for social care. Obviously, we don't know exactly where that's coming from, and it's a question about whether or not the council as a whole will be agile enough, flexible enough to make use of that money, and clearly social care needs a huge amount of money, but I'm wondering what other areas your colleagues are talking about where that money may well be spent if it arrives. It won't be obviously that much. And in terms of the money that we are spending at the moment on day-to-day services for our residents, the spending will be at least 310 million, which excludes housing and education, which is actually an increase, small increase, but it's an increase on last year, and I think that's due to some really good work that everyone is doing. But I think it relates to some of the questions earlier in relation to demand and not just the pressure this year, but the continuing pressure. And it's the importance of using that money in a way that supports people at particular points of crisis in their lives, at particular ages. There are particularly moments related to housing or to family breakup, etc. And maybe you could talk about how we are making sure that money goes in a way that will support people, so in the future they need hopefully less of it, and they're able to provide more of it themselves. And I suppose a question, it does link into what we talk about a lot here in relation to co-production, talking to people, finding out what they want, and then constantly checking with them, have a process of checking with them to find out, is the support we're giving them the right support, and is it leading to better outcomes, in order that that money may be, for those individuals, when they're ready, it can be reduced. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start and then the team can fill in. The 600 million, and there's a few other things in the budget. I think we won't struggle to spend it, really, will we? In the sense that, you know, in following on from Beverly's previous comments, we just might feel like that's not quite enough. We can't pretend that we aren't also facing things like the increase in national insurance payments, increase in the minimum wage, not in themselves necessarily bad things, but they will create pressures for providers who have to be conscious of that, and that will become visible. And Beverly rightly pointed out earlier that what tends to happen is, obviously, a contract will be for a period of time, and when that ends, a provider will then come to seek some kind of redress on that one. One of the things that interests me as well is there's some money that's been earmarked for the NHS, and I'm particularly interested in how that can be spent and how we can make sure that can be spent in a collaborative fashion at a local level, with that eye to prevention and early intervention. But you all know, because I've been really open in the past, and actually you've heard as well, because you've had sessions on continuing health care funding and all sorts, so you're well aware of those challenges. But there's something in there, and is there space for innovation in prevention, that connection between primary care, what we're doing in social care, and then the acute system? So I think there's some discussions to be had, and there isn't quite clarity yet from government. You asked about how is everyone spending the money? So obviously there's adults, there's children's, and housing's really important. And it strikes me that whatever we do, following on from Mary's comments, whatever we do there to improve people's living conditions will demonstrably improve how well they can live independently, and how well they can have how well they can feel independent and not be dependent on particular services or see poorer outcomes later. So I think that's the answer to where that money will go. I think despite everything, we're still doing some really really important and good things, and some of them, you're right, aren't very expensive. Things like warm spaces, things like a service like Reach and Connect, which is about prevention, helping with loneliness, helping people with befriending, those sorts of things. We're still doing that kind of stuff. And one of the really good things that, and I hope I'm allowed to speak about it, I'll do, and then I will, and then Seema can tell me off if I'm not. But one of the things that we're doing with the Household Support Fund is helping pensioners who we think might be not quite yet in receipt of pension credit. We've got a big drive on that, but before that, we're going to use a proportion of the Household Support Fund to make sure that they have an allowance for winter fuel. And I would say that's a great example of how local authorities, local councils can support people. And also, I'd quite like a greater dialogue on that with national government, because it's a way to work together and realise some of the aims of national government, but also protect some of our most vulnerable people locally. So I think we've still got a strong council tax reduction scheme, all those things that really help people not experience poverty as severely as they could do. I think they're all important in keeping people out of hospital, keeping people well, etc. And totally agree with you on the co-production front. And so the team will maybe come in a bit more of the technical on that front. But we have, I suppose, instigated a piece of work recognising that co-production's an everyday journey that needs investment into it every day. And we've put in some resource into looking at how we do that and how we do it better and how we continue to collaborate. But you will all remember that we've got a commissioning co-production group. And so some of the things that we talk about today as well will involve that group in terms of ideas for how we make savings, but also look at services in a different way and review them.
So did anyone else want to come in on that? I thought that was quite a, did that fully answer your questions? Yep, okay. So I just wanted to continue to stick with revenue, but in adults and health within the cabinet report. There's a quick question at 12.7. So this is the cabinet report, which is actually on page 154. So that's moving on from the report to our initial part. But I just wanted to check with you on table 1, because at 12.7 it says estimated additional budget requirement for adult social care in 25-26 is 25 million, which is 9.3 million identified in the last update of March 24. An additional 15.1 million is set out in table 1. I noted in table 1 though, when I went down to have a look at this, in 2026-27, the pressure there is only noted at 930,000. So it drops from 15 million pounds pressure, and we've been discussing exactly why with yourselves today. It seemed a substantive drop, and then it goes up to 7 million again in the next few years. In the next 3 years, to be honest, in and around 7 million. So I was just wondering, maybe Neil, on the sort of the finance part, if you could just explain that part of the table for me. Thank you.
That is indeed a very good question. Yeah, it's a good point, because it does look anomalous. I'm trying to. I haven't looked at this table for a couple of weeks. I'm trying to remind myself exactly about the flow of information that led to the 930,000, because that is additional pressure, because there is pressures built in as part of the previous MTFS. So I'm pretty sure that reflects what was already previously built in. So I'm just trying to just double check the narrative. That on 12.7, as you quite highlighted, that we already have built in some pressures. I'm trying to remember. So if you give me 5 minutes, I'll just double check, because I'm pretty sure that
no, absolutely. I just wondered if it might have been a typo, because you know sometimes on these things, so many tables, so many figures get. It just seemed odd that it. I mean, I could see it going from 15 to 7, but 15 to 930,000. Well, there's another suggestion. So we're making up the finances on the hoof here, but I'll let Neil have a proper look at that. And then I was just checking again on page 158 on table 2, the proposed savings. So we've obviously got, we've got an increase in savings asked for. So at the moment in 25-26, we've got 651,000 of proposed savings. And then in 26-27, we jump up to £979,000 worth of savings. And then we go right back down in 27-28 to 335,000. So again, it's sort of an odd movement, I would have thought at that point. Is there a particular reason why it sort of goes up quite high and then drops down on the savings part on table 2? And so just to let you know, that's page 158.
There is a profile of individual savings that make up those amounts. So some come on stream at different pace and speed of delivery. And I think I'm just trying to remember which appendix sets out the detail of those savings. So there will be a table further down, which I'm trying to which appendix. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah.
Apologies, Chair.
Yeah, you're right.
Is that right? Neil, you can correct me. On 181, I think some of those savings, obviously the work starts in 25-26, but actually you don't realise some of the real achievements until the following year, looking at some of the items. So I think that's probably why
That's correct.
Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. So on page 181, it's got adults, health, community specific service specific savings. So the first 3 lines are those associated with adults and health. And you can see the profile is that the Connected Care Review has a profile over a 3-year period. The opportunities are a different profile, and the Connected Communities is a different profile again. So those numbers should sum to that table you're referring to.
Thank you. I think probably my question was more about, is this a recognition that actually with the amount of money needing to be put into adult social care needing to be increased, is there a recognition that's getting harder and harder to make the savings? So you, as a council, we're asking for less savings in those next, so from 2026-27 onwards, you've got a drop in, according to that table in 181 of the amount of money being asked. Beverly, I'm just going to, obviously, because you're on top of all the savings bit, I'm just wondering why, or is it just much harder at this point to put in those savings that you think are going to be able to be delivered?
Exactly. You've got to it at the last summary. So we can only work this is an exercise we do every year, if you remember. And this is the information we know at this point in time. I'm sure next year, if something significant happens and we get improved remuneration from the government, all of that would change it. If we get less, then again, it will change. But this is the best information we have at this current time. And we do our best to make sure that it's as accurate as can be based on current information. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Quick question, which is in terms of the biggest savings that you're talking about, they're cross-cutting wide reductions, and that's by far the largest number I can see. Can you, sorry, these are on page 158, it's the pages we've just been looking at about the finances. I just wanted to ask, have those been identified? Do we know what that means? And secondly, how much of that would impact adult and social care, if any? Because it's quite a large sum of money. Thank you. There's table 4 has integrated the proposed savings and management actions from 25-6 onwards, and what it shows is a £13 million savings for 25-26, running to 21 million by the end of the 5-year period. If you look at all the other figures, they're in single figures in millions rather than in double figures, which is why I'm particularly asking about that.
And can I just say, I hear what you're saying. We're going to come to that later on in the appendices. Is that okay? Can you hold that thought, that figure, and we'll take that and we'll as we go through. Is that okay? Because I just want to finish off on the revenue. Is that all right? But definitely hold on to that as a question. I'm just going to check if there's anything on a general capital, because we've got the capital projects in the report later. Is there any other question you wanted to ask on the capital area in either cabinet paper or the paper beforehand? A question to the panel at the moment, or are you happy just to go on through the appendices? Okay, I'm looking for questions. Okay, I'm going to ask just one quick question. This is an overviewing question sort of thing. So when we look at budgets, we're always challenged to think about in capital it's an invest to save. And I know we've discussed that a lot previously with you. So are there any projects coming up that aren't in these papers that you're looking at on the invest to save ones? And have we ever gone back in any of the ones over the years that I've been doing this when we've said, oh, this is an invest to save project? This is great because it will save us money, because have we ever gone back and had the ability to look back and see, is it actually saving us the money that we thought it was going to save us? So have we actually had the capacity, I suppose, in the team? Because I know there's a lot going on. So have we got the capacity to do that? Thank you.
Again, thanks for the question. So this year, and maybe even to the latter end of last year, what we've been able to make the case for is a change board to support what we call category A projects, and the adult social care savings, as is now housing demand, for example, are category A projects. So that is a resource. It's like a program management team that actually supports the analysis, the delivery, and any mitigations for its identified at an appropriate stage, any mitigations that may be needed, from tracking how well we are doing in terms of each individual project. So that's a whole change program team we didn't have in previous years that we now have now that does exactly that function. Thank you.
Okay, so that's all I have on the general capital. So should we move on to appendix 1, which is the forecast budget pressures on page 175. Actually, it is a little bit further over for adults. It's on page 76, but you'll notice at the top it says adults, health and communities, housing demand. That isn't coming to us, that's coming to the housing scrutiny panel, and they know that, and that information is being provided to them. So there you might want to ask on that. Please let the other panel do that. We are looking at adult social care, which is underneath, where we've got the forecast pressure of just 15.1 approximately £1 million going forward. So I'm just going to pause there and let colleagues have a quick chance to have a look at that. And is there anything you wanted to particularly ask questions on that area? We've had quite a lot of conversation already about this, but just the opportunity now. Thank you.
Can I come back on the question you asked earlier about the...
Please do, Neil. Thank you.
Reminding myself of the adjustments. So essentially what the 15 million, as we've got on the screen there, addressed the budget gap we've got in the current year and the projection for the coming year. We then got a new baseline. We also have funding built into the MTFS for 26-27 of 6.57 million. So having addressed the baseline adjustment, we don't need anything more than 930,000 additional funding based on our current modelling for 26-27. Thereafter, we're then reflecting all the increases around numbers, cost, and other inflation factors. We go back up to circa 9 million and beyond. So year one, that 15.16 million, plus what was already built into the MTFS from budget in the current year, is addressing the gap. Thereafter, for 26-27, we need a smaller uplift to try and make sure that the modelling is kept in line with expected cost.
You're going to know what question I'm going to ask, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So we've had conversations like this in the past, and every year we get to it. I mean, in the report, it does mention the drawdown of reserves to cover previous areas where we thought we only needed a certain amount to go in. And you said 6.5 million extra into the baseline. Knowing what we know now about the pressures, is that a realistic figure? Bearing in mind we haven't got the reserves to be able to draw down as we had in the past, if that does increase again. Thanks.
The question, in terms of the critical thing is we have to recognise the real pressures that the service is facing. So they're real, they're about demand, about cost. So it's important we recognise that. So the additional costs we're building in, the 15.16 million, recognises we've got a gap in the current year and we've got a gap next year based on the modelling we have. In terms of how it's funded, that's a challenge because we obviously recognise that's part of the gap where we've got to. So at the moment we're trying to address as far as we can, ensure we've got the right budget envelope, starting point, as it were, for adult social care, based on the modelling we're undertaking around numbers, cost, and other factors. So in terms of that, how we fund that, that's a wider challenge for the council as part of the addressing how they're going to deliver a balanced budget. So part of that will come from the savings we've already identified. And part of that will come from the work we've already discussed around managing numbers.
Okay, I'm just going to put it out there that I think at the moment that's a little bit of a risk, just based on, you know, I hear exactly what you're saying and I completely take on board everything you've said and colleagues here today. I think just knowing that we've had to use reserves to mitigate the pressures on adult social care budget now for quite a while, and it has been rising. I would be concerned at this point that we've only got it's huge, but you know, in relation to the pressures that we've seen, 6.5 million at that point. But I have got Councillor Harron coming in. Councillor Mason, is that a question? And Councillor Brennan, thank you.
Could I ask a question? It's on page 168, I think, under section 18.14. Is that okay, Chair? Yeah. So I'm just coming, so it's identifying delivery of budget reductions. And there's a statement here, they say that you say the focus will be on identifying efficiencies that improve processes and I assume, but no impact on outcomes for residents. But there is a risk that these will not be sufficient and some service reductions may be required for a balanced budget to be set. I would like to know a little bit more about this statement. So for example, what efficiencies are you looking at to improve processes, number one? Number two, if it's not sufficient, which services will be reduced and how it will impact on residents? Thank you.
It's 18.4, isn't it? 18.1.
Yeah. So it's a very stark statement, but I think it, you know, reflects the fact that there is a significant 30+ million pound gap that we have yet been able to balance. So what it does mean, and I think it relates to all the sort of cross-cutting efficiencies, etc., that we haven't yet gone on to. How much further can we go with those, for example? And in identifying efficiencies relates to what I said earlier about that line by line, which is currently just started, line by line accounting of what we actually spend, how we spend it. So the outcome of that will give us some results. And but there is a risk. I think what that is spelling out, despite doing all of that, there'll be a risk that we still are unable to balance the budgets. And so when we say service reductions, we have to look for the non-statutory side of things. We cannot touch the statutory side of things. Does that answer your question?
No, thank you. So this statement is a general statement. It is not purely focused on adult health because really your services are statutory. Is that what you're saying to me?
So I go back to the first thing, which I think is so important that I shared. We consider the challenges in the demand services as a whole council challenge.
I'll just come in and just to doubly reassure, because I know why you're asking, and I think it's really important. I think that's the point. The point is we're one whole council and we need to deliver services for everyone. We have statutory responsibilities and we must deliver those. We'll continue to do that. And so what that means is looking at everything across the whole council rather than saying, well, to be a bit glib about it, oh, well, that's an adult social care problem, so, sort that out yourselves. We're not working like that at all. And more than ever, there's been really close collaboration, and that's grown over time as out of necessity, unfortunately, but not bad to look across the whole council and ask ourselves, should we be doing things in a different way? And should we be being more effective or efficient? We should do that every year too.
I hear what you're saying, although obviously we do have some savings in adults and health. So I think there is that, and I think I can see why you're asking that question, because every year we are looking to make savings somewhere in that directorate. So I think it's just, I think probably the concern is whether they're going to impact with this amount of money we need to find as a council. We're not talking about the statutory parts of adult social care, but the other parts that we do, and we'll go on to those later. I think we'll just go into a bit deep at that point. So Councillor Mason, Councillor Brennan, two last quick questions on this, and then we'll move to the appendices. Thank you.
Right, so my questions are, we're obviously all aware of the pressures which have resulted in this issue that we're facing, and poverty, poor housing, COVID, and cuts to the NHS have all accumulated together. So what I wanted to ask, well, number one was looking at the services that we provide, which of those are most impacted by cuts to the NHS? Because we know that if there are going to be more people who are bedbound, there are less people who are able to go into hospital they'll stay there for longer time, they'll come out iller, and the cost to us will be greater. So I wanted to know the discussions with the NHS about that difficult question and where you see the tensions lying. And then I just wanted to finish with, this clearly is major for everybody, isn't it, in the whole of Haringey? And so I want to know around the communication strategy for adult social care in terms of user groups, because if people are going to get really upset about a cut to, for example, libraries, then do they know that the result of that might be that their elderly parent might not get the support that they need? So that kind of debate is, I think, really essential for people.
I'll come in and I wanted to answer the latter first, if that's all right. I think you're right. It's really important that people understand why we're doing what we're doing and what the issues are and how we're tackling them. I think we've started on an information campaign. I mean, it's glibly said that a lot of people don't really understand social care and what it delivers and how important it is. And of course, there are 3,000 odd people every week who receive it, and their family members might well know about it, but everybody else might not know so well. So there is a communication piece which has started going out in the last few weeks, which is just about on our socials and etc., just about where we spend money, just explaining that simple fact so that people can who aren't aware can begin to grow that knowledge. And of course that piece of information will grow as we're going to bring out the consultation. But you might also want to have, and I don't know, Chair, forgive me if I'm overreaching myself, that might be something you want to talk a little bit more about when you have the general overview and scrutiny as well. You'll have the right people there in the room as well on that, a little bit more on that, but we're acutely aware of that. And we're also acutely aware in adult social care of explaining our impact and talking about both the challenges, but also talking about the really positive ways in which we can impact people's lives. So this week we went out with a really important story of a resident who's won an award, who he is learning disabled and has been doing some amazing work with his family and his carers and achieving so much. So it feels really important to us that we still talk about the really good things and the really positive ways that social care can impact people's lives, with that hope of growing that understanding about why, apart from our statutory duties, why it's really important that we're an inclusive community and that those values are at the heart of our services. And I'll leave you to answer the NHS one. I might say things I should.
Thank you for the question. NHS tensions, that's what I've jotted down as being the sort of the crux of the question. I think it's fair to say that hospital discharge is the dominant narrative everywhere. And some of the challenges you've articulated yourself, Councillor Mason, around people being discharged and, you know, some of that revolving door, the support, the community health support not being there, etc., etc. So what we in social care endeavour to do is to shift the emphasis onto admissions avoidance, onto early intervention and prevention. How do we support people to prevent them going into hospital in the first place? Unfortunately, that is quite a challenge in terms of, and we all understand how challenged the acute trusts are in terms of bed occupancy, etc., etc. We're in the middle of winter now, and it's quite a challenging situation. So it's a real dilemma, isn't it? You've got to see it from both sides. But I would say that hospital, until we can shift the narrative, and I think it's incumbent on us to actually demonstrate that actually it is more beneficial to focus on admissions avoidance as compared to just to focus on hospital discharge. Until we win that argument, I think we, you know, we've still got a long way to go. But that is certainly something that not just myself in Haringey, but across nationally, ADAS is engaged in at the highest level, actually trying to get that into the sort of the an equal emphasis as I would say that therein lies the tension. I think a second area, which is really around, and we've talked about it, and there was a special session on it, is continuing healthcare. When we have cash-strapped systems like the health system, as well as we have cash-strapped systems like local authority, people tend to sort of, you know, retreat and put up sort of boundaries, forgetting how families and individuals are actually affected. So you will see when we get to savings that one of our challenges we've been trying to address is how do we get the fair outcome for families with high health needs and to ensure as far as possible that health meets those costs. So those are a couple of examples in terms of the challenges with the NHS. But I actually think there's an opportunity. So the NHS got shed loads of money, didn't they? We got a pittance, which we know will be swallowed up by national insurance providers knocking on the door, national minimum wage increases, which is a good thing. I'm not against that at all. But I think there was a statement from government about funding flows. It's incumbent on us to work in partnership to see how we can demonstrate that funding can actually flow from the NHS to the community. It's as simple as that in my eyes. How can we demonstrate that? And that's evidence-based. And I think a lot of our activity, unfortunately, in social care is not as evidence-based as activity in the NHS. We haven't got that sort of track record, but I think we have to demonstrate that there is a growing evidence base for that preventative, admissions avoidance and identifying people at high risk and how we support them out of hospital. And I've been, being part of a group that we're trying to build that model more nationally, prevention, communities of practice. So watch this space, but that's the area where we really need to focus going forward. Thank you.
Sorry, hang on a minute. Sorry, Councillor Mason. This is going to be a very quick question.
Really, really fast.
Okay, because I've got Councillor Brennan and then we do need to move on.
It's a really assurance that when you're talking as you did, which it's like music to my ears, that's brilliant. Are you also talking about mental health?
Absolutely.
Great.
Have to assure you of that. You're probably aware that we've gone through quite some transformative changes with our local trust, and despite those significant changes, things are going well. Social workers, mental health social workers are now under the control of the local authority. there hasn't been a decline in performance with the trust. So I think that's a really positive story. Thank you.
Councillor Burney, you've been waiting very patiently, and then we're going to move on to the appendix. Thank you.
Well, the majority of my questions have been answered while I was waiting, so that's good. I was wondering whether you think, and you've sort of answered this, whether you think that the fact that people are staying at home more and not going into care homes is because that's a very good policy, and I think that is a policy that everyone wants to practice, whether that is sort of subtly giving the impression that making people assess them as being not eligible for NHS funding but eligible for social funding, and whether that is actually impacting on our funding, simply because when people are thought of as staying at home, that they're better than they are psychologically, you know. I thought maybe that might be one of the impact. You don't think it's an impact?
I don't think so. I think there's really strict criteria around continuing healthcare assessment, starting with a checklist, multidisciplinary, etc., etc. I'm not saying that there aren't disagreements. If they weren't, if everything flowed smoothly as a result of that quite robust sort of process that we have, then we wouldn't needing to challenge back in terms of what we think might be not be the right decision. But I do think that the criteria for continuing healthcare is really high. So it's not really dependent on where you reside. Thank you.
That's somewhat a thing, which is, I think there is something interesting in what you're saying there, Kathy, which is that we don't always feel like it's always very clear to the individual that they might have a right to healthcare or health funding, and it's really complex. Let's be honest, the whole picture is really complex, and then add to that you're really ill or your loved one is really ill, and so I think it can be hard to distill quite. So I'll have things in my inbox where people are writing to me, but actually they're very deeply involved in the NHS and are interacting with the NHS. So it's clear that sometimes in that the messaging gets lost. And what I haven't concluded yet in whatever it is, nearly 4 years, is if some of that is about better communication, or if simply it's just because it is really confusing and complex and people are under a lot of pressure and stress. And so it's hard to unpick. And actually, at the end of the day, you just want your loved one, or you just want to be well. And that kind of, the detail can kind of get a bit fuzzy.
So when we're talking about preventative care, are we thinking of things like funding carers, helping carers so they can care at home? So if we are doing so, are we also thinking about things like the carers coffee, which is for the well-being of all the carers? And if we are doing so, could we, because there is a thing, it is a particular charity, Carers Coffee. It provides services for the carers to keep them happy, and it's very underfunded, and it's a very, very valid thing. And I'm just mentioning that if we're talking about preventative care, for a very, very small amount of money, in fact, £1,000 more, they would be able to make a lot more carers happy. And I was there today, and they did ask me to make this point. It's a very important point. They're very, very good.
I absolutely agree with you, Councillor. We have been funding the Carers Coffee Morning, if we're talking about the same thing, for many, many years, and we intend to continue funding it. We think it is a really low cost, high value forum and activity, and something that we should support. We have never, ever, to my knowledge, said that we would not fund it.
It's because obviously the request doesn't come through to you, but they put in a request to have a tiny bit more money. They get 2,000 a year. They wanted 3,000 because of inflation, and they are not getting. They've been refused. They say, I've seen. So I just thought I'd mention it.
Okay. I have allowed that pitch.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are pictures of all other carer coffee ones out in the borough as well. I'm sure all of them would like extra funding. So I'm just going to add that to on the thing of
Chair, I think your panel members there pressing some advantage
yeah,
there.
I'm just now trying to put it out across the whole borough that there will be all. I think it's disintegrating somewhat, so I'm going to bring us back, but thank you very much. I did appreciate the enthusiasm with which that was said, but all coffee carer mornings as well. Right, okay, thank you. So we are now going to move on to Appendix 1, which is, sorry, Appendix 2 in the in your packs, and these are 2025-26 proposed savings. Now, the heading is here for cross-council savings. But we also have been challenged to look at these because it is across all areas. So, for instance, I mean, I'll start us off very quickly, but it says staffing efficiencies on page 177, staffing budgets in the councils chargeable to the general fund amount to 160 million. All directorates are required to deliver a 5% reduction in the staffing budget from 25-26. So looking at adults and health, because that's obviously where we're concentrating in tonight, is this something that you have been asked to do? And if you have with your staffing, are you concerned that it's going to put greater pressure on service delivery because you don't have as many people in place to deliver that care? And we're already hearing about how stressed people are working in this environment. So that's my first question. Then I'm going to look to colleagues if they want to raise any others in that area. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I might bring Joe in as when I just share some headlines. So yes, it does apply to adults, health and communities, and therefore does apply to adult social care. The approach we've taken is to, and it goes back to the whole sort of efficiency way of working. We have had for some time quite high levels of agency staff. We know that they can be less cost effective than permanent staff. So there has been and continues to be a real drive to reduce the number of agency staff, and that's included in the 5% savings. We've also looked at spans of control. So my aim absolutely is to protect the front line. Let me just make that clear. We've looked at spans of control of management, managerial staff, and there have been significant variation. And there's a sort of an HR guidance around, you know, a manager and how many direct reports. And so we're looking at how we can refine and have consistency in terms of our spans of control of management. The other area we are looking for, because we know that, you know, I can talk about reducing agency, but we know that the market for recruitment, otherwise, if it was easy to recruit, we would have done it, you know, successfully. So there's a whole program of growing our own, sort of supporting people who've been identified with the potential, some of them connected communities workers, into social work training. They then become apprentice and they're supported through that career progression. So those are some examples of how we are approaching the efficiencies. Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything more.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Thanks. Thanks, Bev. So building on that, I think we've kind of seen this as a bit of an opportunity to do a bit of rebaselining of all our staffing. So it's back to what Councillor Mason was saying about being really confident of your systems and confident in what your systems are telling you. So we've done an excellent bit of analysis, not me, as to what our staffing is. We've looked at the agency staff that Bev mentioned, and I think some are in business critical roles or perceived to be. So people have been asked to do a business case where they perceive that to be the case, and where staff are particularly talented or delivering some excellent areas of work, we're hoping to move them into temporary contracts as is appropriate. We're obviously looking at vacancies and focusing on statutory, as Bev said earlier. And I think a critical piece here is about working with the heads of service so that the leadership piece is owned across the service. It's not seen as something that's being done to them, but something that they're participating in. so that we've got that accountability. I think so often when you have cuts in staffing, savings in staffing, it can be seen as a leadership piece right at the very top. This is something that we've all got to own in the service, and it builds in with what Neil was saying around, you know, financial accountability. You know, it's as important for social workers as it is for the senior leadership team. And one last thing is that we've, as you know, implemented the locality model. And that's all about trying to make services more efficient at grassroots level, joining up with our integrated partners. So wherever possible, we want to protect the roles we created there, because we think that those will bring in further efficiencies down the line. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies, I had Helena's hand up earlier, which I missed. So Helena, can I bring you in at this point? Apologies for missing your hand.
It's really bad news that you missed my hand, especially as a lot of your question was the one that I was going to ask, but I will ask it perhaps in a different way. I've got two things in Appendix 2. The one is on the staffing costs, and it seems to me a misbalance that in the area of the largest overspend, you're asked to get rid of 5% of your staff. But in fact, I cannot see, even with what you've said, how you can deliver the ones that you are statutory meant to provide. And I do worry that you are going to find yourself in a very difficult position. And why is it that it is 5% across the whole board? Should it not be recognised? And I guess this is the finance people, I don't know, that perhaps you might need a little less percentage and other places might need a little bit more. Could I just put in my second question that I don't want to lose, which is about digital transformation, which is a page or so on. There is a cut in the digital transformation budget, and it really worries me when it comes to adult and social care. So maybe somebody could explain to me how it's going to impact adult social care and health, because, and also whether an equality impact assessment has been done on this reduction that is being proposed in changing to digital transformation. So sorry, I may not have done that very well, but I hope you understood me.
Thank you, Helena. And obviously we'll take the digital transformation part in the bit that if it affects adult social care. So if you could unpick that if it does, because it says Councillor Carlin, but understand that's finance. Thanks.
Thank you, Helena. Thanks for the questions. So I'll start and then Sarah will come in on the digital. She's much more tech savvy than I am. So I just really want to assure you that I'm very confident that the 5%, it was a personal suggestion from me, having looked before we had this sort of cross-council ask to look at 5% staff efficiencies. Oh, is it my phone? Sure. Okay. Sorry, there was a bit of interference there. And but I didn't do that lightly. I looked very detailed at all the areas that I highlighted in terms of cost of agency staff, the spans of control of managerial staff, and the vacancy factors that had been around for a long time, really tidying up the establishment piece. So I'm very confident that that will not have an impact on, that there are no social workers involved, for example. That will not have an impact on our ability to deliver our statutory services. Just want to give you that assurance.
Okay.
Sarah.
Hi, I'll come in relation to the digital transformation aspects that particularly impact on adult social care. So there is a transformation programme that links to work within improving the front door offer, and the technology that's available to improve efficiency of services within adult social care that would allow for those savings to be delivered. So it's not actually a cut per se to digital transformation budgets, it's the savings that are generated through efficiencies created by digital transformation. Thank you.
Sorry, can I
Okay,
just
Helena,
come
did
back
that-
in on? No, not
Yes, that's
Sarah.
fine.
That's Sarah. Sorry, that didn't really answer what I was after, which is, will those changes actually impact your, shall I call them customers? What do you want? Will they impact them? Because mostly when you move over to digital, you are going to find that you are impacting the users in some way. And that's what I was after. Not that they were being savings because you're going digital, but how's it going to impact the population that you serve in adult health and social care? Does that help?
Absolutely, it does. And I suppose alongside any digital transformation work, it's important to recognise that some of those will be back office efficiencies, so will not directly relate to sort of resident experience, as I would call it. So it might not be a digital interface for residents, but it would improve your back office efficiency. It is worth saying that alongside any sort of resident facing digital transformation, there has been a new post created in the council that will focus on a partnership and collaborative approach across directorates, voluntary community sector and partners, very much including health partners in that space, that will focus on digital inclusion to make sure that alongside transformation we are being very targeted in our support for those residents who face barriers to digital access, which I think in part responds to your question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, right, thank you. So just looking to see if there's any other questions on this area, Councillor Haran.
Thank you, Beverly. Can I maybe have a discussion with you about agency workers and what is your strategy to convert those agency workers to substantive workers within the trust? I mean, the reason they're agency is a very specific reason, right? And I work in the NHS and I've seen the challenges over years. Actually, we've been talking about this. How do you convert agency into non-agency, particularly in difficult areas where you can't recruit people? So I want to know, look, what is the proportion of agency you have now, and what number are you looking to reduce it, and how are you going to do it, and how confident you are in doing that?
So it's an ongoing process. It's not something we're about to start. We have embarked on it earlier this year, and I don't want to give you a wrong. It's at least 25% in terms of agency. At least, I will give you the. So now I think you'll understand why we need to do something about it, and why we have been trying to do something about it. Now there are some staff who are what I call career agency workers. They just won't want, and we've had those conversations, and a number of them have left. There are some who love Haringey, love working with us, and are willing to, go through the conversion process. Now, it does take some time because there's got to be skills assessment, competency assessments, the usual HR rigor that we need to do when we're sort of onboarding anyone. But we have a significant numbers of people who actually want to come on to. So it's through those conversations and, letting go the people who are not ready to convert where it's not business critical. We're not going to make any decisions that are business critical and put, obviously, risk into the service, but that has been going on for some time. And we are confident, actually, that combined with our sort of other activity about growing our own, and also ongoing recruitment campaigns, we have revolving recruitment adverts, will get us to in a more stable place, in the near future. But I suppose I was a little bit as skeptical as you when we started the exercise, but there are a significant number of people who actually do want to have a permanent employment in Haringey.
It does. I mean, I think Councillor Desnes wants to come in and maybe.
Wanted to come in, forgive me, and Beverly, you can tell me off if you think I'm wrong, but there are lots of reasons as well why people might want to come and work in Haringey. And we talked a while ago, you'd all be aware that we had great success with our children's inspection, and we did talk about how those kinds of successes really impact the perception of the borough, not just for children's social care, but also for adults, and just generally people feeling positive about the borough and positive about our vision, positive about our values and how we live them. So I think those things do play in, and I say that only because I happen to know someone who's a social worker who told me about their, I mean, it's rather convenient, you might say, but it genuinely is true, who told me about their changing the perception of a range of different boroughs in London, including Haringey. So I think those things do help in inspiring confidence and inspiring people wanting to be here and part of the Haringey family.
I think it's just really finding out what numbers we can actually do end up swapping over from agency to, and I think we have asked that question in the past in different areas, because I know you've been looking at agency over the years. I know this isn't a new thing that you're working on, so I think it's really important. I think, and one of the recommendations might be to find out. Do you want to make that then?
I'm going to suggest a recommendation is to actually come back and to give us the absolute number of agency and what is the success of converting them into your substantive staff, actually.
Thank you. So we need to move on to the next bit. Councillor Mason. Okay, yes.
Promise.
Yeah, no, just.
I want to ask about the integrating connected communities, the locality model, and just to have a feedback about how widespread that is now and whether there will be any reductions in that.
Sorry, Councillor Mason. So just to, I think you just skipped ahead slightly. You got in there rather swiftly. So this is moving on to the adults and health community service specific savings, which we're now going to look at. We're going to start with connected care review.
Okay.
Then we're moving on to day opportunities. Then we're going on to the integrated connected community. So we'll take your question at that point. I'll have your name next to that one. But if we could just take it in order, so we could just make clear if there's any recommendations from the panel on this, because those are specific service specific savings. So we're going to start with the connected care review. We've got here to review the delivery model for the connected care service, to identify alternative options for enhanced service offer. There's not a lot in that to explain quite what you mean. So I'm just asking if there's a moment that someone could just expand on what this connected care review is actually looking to do in order to cut the money that's identified in your budget. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I'll start just by explaining a little bit about what connected care, because we've got lots of connected terminology in our narrative. So we've spoken about this here before. It's a 24-hour, 365-day a year emergency service provided by us. It offers older and vulnerable people that sort of safe and sound system. Some people call it care line in their homes, where if they have challenges, they can press a button, it goes through to the operator, they can ring the ambulance if required. I think the challenges have been, we know the wait times for ambulances, and we don't have a service that can, always go out and help people whilst waiting for the ambulance. So it's limited in that way. So there are three main aspects to the service. We've got assistive technology is obviously the basis on which it works. And recently we're in progress of going from analog to digital for all the systems. And then we have staff who install equipment in people's houses. And then there's the monitoring, responding that I referred to. Now, historically, so there's a charge, people are assessed and there's a charge for the service. historically, it has been underfunded to the tune of about 800k, 7 to 800k. Correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, in terms of, so we're actually operating at a loss. So benchmarking, obviously, before putting forward this proposal, we benchmarked what's happening in other boroughs, suggests that there are other delivery models that could provide enhanced and more cost-effective services, and even in some cases enhance outcomes, because some local authorities have a responding and, let's say, a lifting service they're trained to sort of support people. So that's what we want to review. That's where, and through the benchmarking, we've arrived at the figures that we feel could be achieved in order to balance the books, actually. So it's a cost avoidance, because we're actually overspending. You know, I talked about overspending money that we haven't got to provide for the service. We're overspending to the tune of about 800k. So that in a nutshell. I hope that's enough explanation. Councillor Connor, you asked a question. Does that answer your question?
So the budget lines, you've got budget impact 200,000. Is that for the entirety? Is that the amount of money that you think you can make over by potentially swapping this service to a different service? You've got the budget impact as your first column, 181. And it's connected care review, adults and health communities, service specific savings. Yes. It's the first line. So I'm just checking, because you've got budget impacted 200,000. So is that, when you say that budget is impacted, are you saying that that's, you're hoping to make that as the whole saving if you swap it to a different service?
Bill, do you want to come in here? Because there's also the fact that it's operating at a loss. So there's some brackets and there's some.
Yeah, I just want to be clear what they're all.
Neil, do you want to explain?
So the 200,000 is effect for the current revenue budget is available for connected care. So and as Beverly highlighted, it's running at a loss. So in effect, we're actually taking a pressure out of the wider adult social care budget by delivering the saving. So just now it's costing us, as you can see, the brackets, we sum the brackets up. In effect, it's costing a pressure of around about 600 and almost £700,000. There's a pressure there, which is unfunded. So by moving it, as options being considered in terms of how to deliver in the future, we'll take that pressure out of the adult social care budget.
Right, but you've obviously got to pay for another service, or you're thinking of potentially. So how is that being factored in?
This is the net position accounting for the cost of the future service and income derived from charges for the service. The model reflects both cost and income going forward.
Okay, I think it's just not massively clear from that line. So just to be really clear, for everyone out there, including me, who's just looking at this now. So we're saying that at the end, once we've swapped this around, we should actually be making the service, because you said we're running about 800,000 plus at the moment as a loss. So are we going to be continued to run at a loss, or are we hoping to make that go back into the
it brings the cost
positive
back, it brings it back into balance, so that there's no cost to the service,
and we're actually looking to bring in income? Is that correct?
Yeah. So just now we've got a budget of £200,000.
Yeah.
The service is costing us more than that, so it's costing us in effect on about £900,000. So there's a gap of 700. So in effect, that's brings that back into balance in effect.
Right. Okay. So you're saying it's going to be cost neutral at the end.
Yeah.
So there's right. Okay, that makes sense at the end. Okay, thank you. Right. Okay. Any further questions on that? Apologies, but I just wanted to get to the bottom of what that line meant. Anything further on that? Okay. So I've got day opportunities as the second one, the commissioning review. Could just someone just expand a little bit more when you say day opportunities, what you mean by that, and then how much savings you're hoping to actually make as a result? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So it's really early days, and what we're suggesting is a commissioning review of our existing learning disability and mental health day services. Mental health is the Clarendon Recovery College, and look to see how we can have more cost-effective, high-quality offer. So at very early stages, looking at what is effectively a spend to date of about 7.5 million when we put everything together. And we feel that there must be more effective, more efficient ways of delivering day opportunities. Can I just make clear, it is not a reduction in the offer for day opportunities. Just have to make that very clear. It's not a reduction in the offer, it's how it is delivered. Thank you. Do you want to talk about the figures too?
In terms of the figures, we're obviously making some broad assumptions about how we can deliver the service more effectively with the same inputs, the same standard. So we're looking at means to deliver a more effective service at lower cost.
I can see, I think for me on this one, and I'm just going to be really clear with Beverly before we move on, because I heard exactly what you said. It's not about the service, it's about, so you're not reducing the service, it's about the delivery of the service. You mentioned Clarendon Recovery College. Are you looking to change how that service is delivered within that space? I wasn't quite sure what you meant when you said that. I'm just really, thanks.
Thanks. So Clarendon currently operates out of the Clarendon. It's proposed to move to Canning Crescent once that's. Yeah. So we feel it's an ideal opportunity, and we have been there previously in terms of trying to develop a kind of a business model for the Clarendon service, which was partly effective. We really want to have another go at it. Just to be clear, the Clarendon Recovery College offers sessions, therapeutic sessions. It's not a bulk, what I call a bulk standard day services for people with mental health needs. There are therapists that come in. There's a cleaning and hoarding service called the A-Team, for example, that operates to clear and houses that are quite challenged. And we just feel with that kind of foundation, we could perhaps have a more effective model for delivery that is more cost effective, for example.
Both that this item and the previous item talk next year in relation to a review in connected care. In the connected care review, there's a figure of 49,000, which presumably is partly the cost of the review. But in the day opportunities, there's on 25-26, it's zero. Are you able to fund the review out of existing funds?
Sorry, that's not the funding of the route. That zero is not the funding of the review. That column refers to what savings we think we might realise in 25-26, and we're saying we're not going to realise any savings in 25-26 because we want to do it in a co-produced way with families, carers, people who use the service as part of the commissioning co-production board that we've already set up. So it's not something that's we've got to review everybody that attends the service. We've got to listen to what's important to them, and we've got to look at how we have conversations around efficiencies together. So that's why we don't want to rush it, and that's why in 25-26 there's zero, because we don't anticipate a savings in the first full year.
just clarity on that. So 7.5 million is budgeted for the service, but we're not expecting any savings until 26-27, which is 100K 26-27, then 300K the following year, and then 450. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then the final one we've got on this paper, which Councillor Mason was going to ask a question on, was the integrated and connected communities, the further development of the adult social care locality model and prevention approach. He says an opportunity to integrate the connected communities model and rationalise resources across the directives. So before Councillor Mason asks a question, can I just again ask a little bit more expansion of what you actually mean by this at this point? Thanks.
Might come in first if that's okay. I think this is a really interesting one because a lot of connected communities, a lot of people know about it or would talk about it. And I suppose what I'd say is probably where we're at with this service, if we were starting today from scratch, it might not look the way it looks now. Some of you will know or remember that it was funded a way back with a little pot of kind of money. And there was always an intent to integrate it, or perhaps not. I'm not entirely certain, but there was certainly a pot of money independently for a period of time. And then, just as that project was getting going, we saw the pandemic, and I think that interrupted quite what the plan was. And it also meant that connected communities as a notion found itself doing all sorts of things, just like we all did in the pandemic. In different ways. And I think that definitely interrupted and changed how both how we were measuring social value in that work, how individuals were working, etc. So I thought I'd just come in and say that probably we'd need to look at whatever we were doing, we'd need to look at that service and be thinking, how does that support what we're doing? And as I say, I think it was a moment in time a while ago. So whilst we're sitting here and talking about making a change, and we're talking about budgets, I just wanted to emphasise, I think that doesn't mean it's not a good thing to do to look at how we deliver a service and how it's effective, especially from the point of view of prevention, and especially from the point of view of maybe one of the other issues that some of you will have heard quite a lot about, which is failure demand, and the issues where other services, be it customer services being trying to access housing services, etc., where those services ought to be picking up their interaction with residents. So I guess I just wanted to preface that with that, because I think it's really important context.
Thank you. And just to add a little more detail, so with the locality approach within adults, there is the opportunity to look at fully integrating the connected communities model into adult social care. And by that, we do mean into, I suppose, the resourcing structures within adult social care. And just to pick up on the point that was made earlier, part of that is also a look at how that aligns with spans of control for management structures as well. So that is in part contributing to that. And picking up on Councillor Dasnev's point, it's the opportunity to really refocus so that the work delivered through the locality model is really supporting those who are sort of most at risk of needing care and support, and therefore it's really targeted early intervention and prevention for those who most need it to sort of maintain independence, but equally that it is really driving the reduction within adult social care and not picking up some of the failure demand that was just referenced. A really important point is that an element that's provided by the team is that collaboration with local voluntary and community sector partners, and also some of those that we commission. And there is an opportunity within some of those arrangements to refocus some of the work that it does kind of respond to some of the demands that we have seen into the service historically. Linked to that is the really important point that was discussed around looking at that wider voluntary and community sector aspects, and making sure that the right type of funding flows through the health side, and indeed, as has been mentioned around the increased funding into health, there is an opportunity, and health partners are very mobilised in having conversations around how they support the voluntary and community sector to provide that community level support. So that is sort of a linked aspect to this. And then I just reference a really specific example within that. So you may have seen that the Haringey Community Collaborative, our capacity building partner, has recently launched a challenge fund that was in relation to supporting voluntary and community sector with the cost of living crisis. We're looking at the next one of those funds being aligned more to mental health, which has really come out as a priority from them. And so there are and there will be programs and projects that will provide that sort of early intervention and prevention support. And we are having those conversations with health partners. It's really important to say that alongside this, it is linked to a wider resident experience and digital transformation programme that allows for, I suppose, improvements in the service offering where we have seen failure demand into that team. So this works alongside changes that you'll hear about, or relevant scrutiny colleagues in other panels will hear about as well. So it's a sort of a linked piece, but it does include a rationalisation of resources as part of this proposal.
Thank you, and thank you for that explanation. I think that was really helpful. But can I just ask a financial question, which is, you've got the budget of 750,000 and then a reduction in the coming year of 700,000. So how is that going to be achieved with all the planning that you're just talking about? I have got an actual question about delivery as well, but I'll ask that finance first.
Yeah. So it's important to note, this is the general fund. That there's that the way Connected Communities is funded is from a number of ways. So there's some general funds, some Better Care Fund, and some public health and resettlement grant that funds that activity. So this in effect would be the savings that would be realised from some of those that could be repurposed into funding other activity, or indeed they are like direct general fund savings. So we are in the sort of planning stages, and what we are doing, which is really important for this one, is it has to work hand in glove with the 5% reductions that that were discussed earlier. So there are regular meeting structures set up in order for us to plan and make sure that we have delivery of that.
So just to be really clear, what you're talking about is savings in the Connected Communities model, which will not be reflected in a reduction in the locality model. Is that correct?
Well, what we're saying is that some of the resources within there will be some changes in terms of the Connected Communities, but we are saying that those resources will embed themselves as part of the adult social care structure, so that there's a direct early intervention and prevention offer embedded within adult social care, whereas at the moment that team sits slightly separately. It's about integrating that in to maximise the opportunities within the locality model.
Right, that sounds great, except that I just want to be sure that there isn't going to be a reduction in the money that's spent in terms of the locality model, because that is the prevention and early integration model that we're talking about. So have we lost 700,000 or not?
It's seen as that funding is separate to the adult social care locality model as it stands at the moment, and so therefore the saving will be delivered, and the elements of the service that we are focused on, adult social care, will move into the structure, but they will go with a consummate budget so that it isn't going to mean further reductions. The bit where there is that opportunity, as we said earlier, is about the management spans of control.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
My second question now is to do with the actual model. And I think that if we were honest, that some of the connected communities worked really, really well, and some of it worked really not well at all. And that was because of the integration of connected communities into services within the council. So in a way, I think this is a good progression. But what my question really is about this model is supposed to be co-produced with effective agencies within each area. You know, so adult social care will be relating with voluntary sector, with health, etc. And how are we going to make sure that that is co-produced? Because I think often the experience of other sectors is that it's a down, you know, it's just delivered. You're told what's going to happen and then that's it. How do we make sure we co-produce?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that one, Councillor. I think we spoke about co-production earlier, and I think there's for me there's two main avenues or main groups of residents we need to co-produce with, and one I think is the groups that we're already working with, and they're the stakeholders and residents that represent residents with learning disabilities, those with lived experience of mental health, those with complex autism, etc. So they're all represented with the joint partnership board governance. But then I think the localities model gives us a real opportunity to begin to talk to people in a geographical in geographical settings. So building on some of the community buildings that we have as a council, like libraries, but also so that some of our stakeholders have. Looking at, this is aspirational because co-production, as we all know, takes a lot of resource to do it well. It's not one conversation, it's an ongoing relationship. But I think to have a map of how we reach out to communities, how we reach out to residents, how we reach out to stakeholders would be really advantageous for us as a council. And I think where we can be efficient is where we plan that work as a council and get basically further faster with fewer resources, but manage to get to more residents. And I think that's the way forward, I think.
If I could just add something to that as well, because there is also the work there with partners, and we see that now there is alignment in terms of primary care to localities, some community services, and in particular mental health community services. We have aligned footprints. So alongside the co-production piece with residents, there's a really important co-production piece with partners, and voluntary and community sector are represented in a number of our partnership boards and structures where we are having those conversations around what sort of integrated neighbourhood teams would look like. And it would be remiss not to mention the fantastic work that we've been doing in collaboration with partners on health inequalities. And we're seeing some results where investment, and this is an example of how we can kind of further develop it, investment into health inequalities that has come from a pooled budget, which is investment from NCOICB and some better care fund investment, has seen for every pound spent, it's made a £1.38 saving across sort of health and partnership sectors, and that is really focused on sort of residents where there is a disproportionate impact or health inequality. So Somali Men's Mental Health Project is a really good example. And yeah, so it's more of that through this model is how we will achieve better outcomes.
Thank you very much. Just one quick point, which is that often the people who are telling people what's happening in the localities are not people from the localities, or they're people who are not representative of people in localities. And I just ask that you're aware of, that you build an awareness of that, and perhaps involve local councillors and other people who know their areas who can put you in touch with different groups.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, Councillor Donovan. It's still on this page, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, good. Because I was just about to make, I'm just going to say to you, panel, about making recommendations. So just have a think on this. Yeah, what you want to suggest.
Yeah, it's about connected communities again, and I think all councillors will be very interested in this, because we know that connected community, when it worked at its best, it was very supportive to people, and I think there is real potential in making in having an improved locality model, but we want to make sure that we keep the best of the things that connected communities could provide, which was referring people to specialist advisors, to Haringey Learns, Haringey Work, and also helping with some sort of mediation around housing and other items. So I think it does link back to this whole idea of co-production. When we do change the model, we need to make sure that well, in terms of advice, the advice sector, make sure the advice sector, you know, the views of them, how they can work with this new organisation and find out how they may have thought things weren't working in the past, but also voluntary organisations, as you said, and not just the ones that are maybe more formal and already part of structures and attend meetings, but there's lots of informal community organisations that do great work, but they're not necessarily always in contact with the council, but on a very local level. They're the people, they're maybe different community groups in terms of people's nationality or original nationality, and do incredible work in supporting them. And we need to make sure that they are also spoken to and listened to. Thanks.
Okay, so I noticed that wasn't necessarily a question, but actually an excellent recommendation, Councillor Donovan. So I think we're going to take what you said there as maybe part of that recommendation on that item. I just wanted to double check before we did recommendations. The money, Neil, for integrating connected communities, the 750,000, what percentage of the budget is that?
That's the net budget, because as Sarah described, it's funded from a number of different sources. So that's a net position. So it's obviously funded from the Better Care Fund, it's funded from Public Health Grant, a number of different areas. So that's the current net budget.
For connected communities?
Yes.
So that is the whole, pretty much the whole budget?
No. No, yeah. So it's not the whole budget.
So it is the whole budget?
So as there's elements of funding that make up the whole connected communities, the net position is 750. So we're left with net position, general fund net position of effectively 50,000. There still is other elements funded because we've got income supporting connected communities through other sources. So it's not removing the entire service. You're only left with £50,000 of service because there's other elements, and I would have to take a double check what the gross budget is before income.
I can answer that.
You?
So this year, and there are some of those elements of funding that are agreed on annual cycles. So if I speak to this year, because then the others like BCF and sometimes resettlement grant, we don't know the answers to some of that yet. So if I speak to this year, it's there's 1.2 million funding this year. We were expecting that to reduce based on an assumption to by a further million. It's also really worth noting, though, that amount of money also includes funding for the financial support team that sits within connected communities at the moment, and that is not proposed. That's proposed to be retained, but possibly in a different part of the organisation. So
okay,
that's the position.
That's lovely. Thank you. That's really clear. And can I just check that this is going out as part of the consultation to residents? Just in this, is it in this format, the way that you've outlined what each of these areas is? How is this actually being presented as part of the consultation to residents?
So we're just sort of developing the consultation, and so we want to make it accessible. Because I think from the discussion, it probably needs breaking down a bit. So we want to make it accessible. Yeah.
Fine, thank you. Okay, so right, based on that, some recommendations from the panel on the proposals put forward under service specific savings. Is there any recommendations on the connected care review, which we heard about? My understanding is that this is a current loss-making organisation to the council, and there's recommissioning process looking at this in order to do a different service, potentially with falls as well, and actually improving hopefully the service, but also finances around it. Any recommendations on this? No. Okay. So my only recommendation would be that obviously as this goes through, that we have sight of whether this is actually achieved, because I think this is a hard one, because the other one was loss making. So moving to another model, there is a risk obviously that another one again could be a loss making one. So I think that's the only risk that I would point out from what I've heard tonight. On day opportunities, the commissioning review around the moving of the opportunities, the service, I think you mentioned Cloud and Recovery College. The service is actually moving to Canning Crescent and looking at that and the money attached to that. Are there any specific recommendations on that line, Councillor Mason?
Yeah, that the adult social care receive the outcome of the review and the proposals that are being made, so that we can comment on them as necessary.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just clarify? You just mentioned Clarendon, but this is all day services, LD and
Day opportunity commissioning review.
yeah.
Under that, I've got day opportunities. You've got the services provided at the moment from Clarendon Recovery College going to Canning Crescent.
No, that's just one. That's the mental health side. There's also the learning disabilities. Just want to make
Apologies,
that
I
clear.
missed that.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and learning disabilities. Yep.
Could I just say, I mean, they're not proposing any savings for next year. I assume that's because you're not going to see all, you're not sure, there's still uncertainty about the Canning Crescent and the rest of it. Is that right or no? Yeah.
So I think we're talking about a recommissioning exercise that we want to co-produce. That is the important element. So we need to work with people in receipt of services, their families and carers, in terms of what an alternative delivery model might look like. So that's why it would be previous to start putting in savings. Next year is April. And we shouldn't fall into that.
Well, I was just thinking it's too early for a recommendation.
I suppose the recommendation would be to note that this is the proposal, and around the financing. Obviously, you've put in those as that's what you hope will happen. Obviously, we all know with best laid plans, when you get to 2026, 27, other things might be in place and you end up not making those. But I suppose that's the risk, because it's in 26, 27 now, and we're in 24, so it's a bit further off. So that's the risk on that. Councillor
I
Mason.
still want to make the recommendation I made, which is that the commissioning review is brought back here. And I think that's particularly in light of what you were saying as well, Beverly, that I think it's important in terms of the services that are going to be made available, that we have a sight of that at least. Thank you.
No problem with that at all. Thank you.
Just wanted to make a point though, Chair, which is that absolutely that can be brought here, and that's, I think, really important that you see that. But just to flag that work will be done with the co-production commissioning board. So when it comes here, you'll have full view of how residents and people who've used the services have participated in that process. I think that's really important. And I know that you would never do that, but I never want to undermine that process. But just so emphasising, we'll be bringing that back and bringing how we've engaged and how that board has influenced the review.
Absolutely. There's no way we would undermine co-production. Absolutely not. The champions of that. So I think that's really important, because both that one and the next one are both going through your co-production board and that co-production approach. So I think that's the recommendation on commit day opportunities. And then the recommendation about integrating connected communities. I think Councillor Donovan sort of made a summation of the very positive work that connected communities have done in the past. And I suppose, I suppose when we move from that, taking that into the locality model, there's always the risk that we lose something in that move. And I suppose that's the risk that we're highlighting here today as the panel around making sure that all the best from connected communities gets transferred across. And then I also note that obviously it is quite a massive saving. On the people that are currently delivering connected communities in their role, are they moving to the locality team, or would their role no longer exist? So would they lose their jobs in that? Because obviously the locality teams, I don't know how that's going to be staffed. So I'm just seeing about the saving. Obviously that's got to be made somewhere in that. So is that a staffing that will be people losing their jobs from the connected community team? I think just being really blunt about it.
So we do anticipate there will be some staffing reductions, and that is how the saving is delivered. Some of that, as I said before, links to spans of control, and there are, I suppose, a number of factors that we will seek to kind of minimise and mitigate impact. For example, some of those individuals are already social work officer apprenticeships, and that will be a great opportunity. And notwithstanding that, there are some people that are on fixed term contracts that will end. So there are a number of ways in which the saving will be achieved.
So Poke.
Yeah, so our apologies, Chair. I know we're on recommendations, but it's just seeking clarity again on that piece if I can. So I know you mentioned that you're getting funding currently from different sources. You mentioned the Better Care Fund, other ones that you put it into connected care communities. So if you now integrate that into the locality model, will that funding still come? Or are you now going to use whatever you're getting onto something else? And so that's how we can actually reduce. I know we're making cuts in services, but I still maintain what we provide to services in another part of adult social care. Is that how it is, or how does that funding work in general?
Yeah, it is. So that because some of that funding we get, and particularly where there is a resubstitution or repurposing of funding, that will be available to deliver the wider adult social care locality model. And yeah, so that's why it's across the two, sort of adult social care and connected communities, because it's the integration of that model and repurposing that funding for appropriately.
Repurposing it within adult social care. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay, and the final risk that I see in that one is because the service is looking to make that saving in 25-26, and you've mentioned about being co-produced, and we all know that co-production can take a reasonable amount of time to go through that process to make sure that we get it done well. So I know that that's going up to March 2026, but all the same, there might be a risk that you might not make the whole of that amount in that one period, and there could be slippage. So for me, integrated connect communities, we haven't moved on yet, Beverly. We're still there.
I just want to be clear. The integrated connected communities is a straightforward reduction to the general fund in 25-26 of 700k. The backdrop to that is that connected communities in totality, that's only part of its funding. It's got funding from other sources. But that 700k from the general fund will go. It's a reduction. It is not a commissioning exercise. What will be the sort of co-produce outcome for what's left is a focus on what preventative activity impacts the adult social care bottom line financially. because as was observed, connected communities, we had a really wide remit. And what we're saying is the general fund contribution goes, but the localities, what's left with the localities has to focus on what will make an impact on the bottom line for the ASC budget. And that's to be developed. But just to make that clear, the 700K from general fund is a direct reduction.
Right, so that's definitely that is the savings, it's definitely going to happen. So I suppose the risk then is to ensure that the localities team absolutely captures the work that the connected communities were doing. No, that's not
No,
actually part of that.
It's not going to, sorry. It can't capture everything because.
Sorry, I'm just going to be really clear. Sorry, we are getting tired and it's getting onto this bit, but I'm just going to be clear that we're talking about. We were talking earlier, and Councillor Donovan made a very good point about the good bits that were really good in connected communities. We wanted to capture those and use that within the localities hub. Is that not correct? No.
So I'm not clear what the good bits are. I think what I think we want you to take away, and we want to focus on the adult social care bottom line in terms of its finance and what preventative activity will impact on that. That is what it will focus on. We know that community did a wide range of tasks, and a lot of it hasn't been spelled out in the conversation, has to be to do with housing and some of the challenges with the housing front, the lack of a housing front door, for example. That will not be a focus of the repurposed or the redirected connected communities. There is another strategy within housing that I'm sure Sarah is happy to talk to about a housing front door and how that can address a lot of the work that connected communities was mired in during its existence. I hope that's clear.
Yes, it is clear, and I think that was maybe you're a lot more clearer than I was. When I was talking about the best parts of connected community is retaining them, not necessarily within what you're talking about, but within the wider offer to the people of Haringey. And clearly that may mean if things, I think you just mentioned that there's housing advice they used to give and mediation. They used to help very much with if somebody was completely lost in terms of getting childcare, they would help them do that. They would give them advice about working and education. So they do have a process, and then they'd probably refer them to Haringey Works or Haringey Learns. So if this isn't happening, obviously, then that puts more pressure on the wider advice sector and also community organisations. So maybe it's not really co-production, it's more making sure those other organisations are aware that there'll be more pressure on them. They will obviously may well make funding applications, not to the council, but to lots of different organisations, clearly not to the council, but because of all of our pressures. But yeah, but there is other funding streams available. So I think it does happen. Obviously, there is discussions with the advice sector and community organisations, but we need to make sure that does happen, so they're aware of when these savings happen. They know that there will be extra pressure on them.
Okay, so I'm going to stop. Can I just say we've actually got quite a lot left and we've spent a long time on this, so we can discuss it afterwards. Anyone like to stay afterwards and carry on this discussion? Absolutely, but I think we're going to have to move on because otherwise we aren't going to get to the rest of the thing, and I'm going to get into trouble from officers if I take you up to midnight. Just wanted to say that I would appreciate next time in the papers that rather than us having to have quite an extensive discussion on what each of these actually means and the way it's done, I think the couple of sentences here wasn't quite enough for us to really understand it fully. as you can tell, because we've had spent quite some time trying to unpick what was actually meant. So I think a recommendation from this committee would be on future ones like this, especially where you're putting two things into one, you know, you're talking about two things in one area and then we're unpicking that. And there's different funding streams. Well, we now understand that. But yeah, I think it would just be really helpful if we had a little bit more explanation for future budget. So I think we got the recommendations clear on that page. I'm just going to check with my colleagues any further recommendations on that page before we move on. But no more just no more questions, just recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Mason.
I did make a recommendation regarding the same issue, so I would like that to be added, please. Yeah, it was about the whole connected communities and area plan and co-production around that, and how co-production in a geographical area was going to be achieved, and just a report back. It doesn't have to be separately, but just a report back to us around that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, we are now going to move on to page 185, the proposed changes to capital programme 2025-26 to 29-30, Appendix 3. In here, this is obviously the capital programme. So we've got Osborne Grove, Wood Green Integrated Care Hub and Locality Hub. We've got a bit more information underneath. So we've got the Osborne Grove Nursing Home, which is the first line in the proposals. So my understanding is from that all the budget has been removed from that because it's no longer going ahead. So that's what I'm reading from this line. Are there any questions on this as part of the capital? Yeah, Councillor Donovan.
Okay, thanks. Obviously, Osborne Grove is something that has people have been very committed to over many years, and we obviously had a meeting in relation to this last year. And I think starting with positive first, I think one of the points we made last time is that there was a co-production, a group of residents who were on a co-production team, and we said that they should continue to be kept informed. So I was pleased to see that in August this year, a letter was sent from Vicky Murphy giving the full details of what the financial position is, and I was also pleased because obviously people involved in the Osborne Grove who are very committed to Osborne Grove do email us all, and I was very pleased to see that at the start of November, just around the time that everything was being made public in terms, Joe Batty, the interim director of operations, sent a detailed letter to the people on that team, and although they weren't happy with the letter, with what was in the letter, they were happy to have received the letter. And I think you also offered a meeting, so maybe you could tell us something about if you had a meeting with them. Yes, I mean this money was left on the capital budget last year, which was a bit of a glimmer of hope, and I can understand the logic for it not being on at the moment. So perhaps also the officer teams, the cabinet member could talk about the future of Osborne Grove and how it is going at the moment. It's a very important shelter for homeless people at the moment, and will that continue? And what are your views about the future of Osborne Grove, the site? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's really painful. It's really painful for us and as an administration, not least because the current leader of the council was the person who initiated this project when she was then in my role. So we don't do these things lightly. I don't know how much you've heard or understood, so forgive me, Chair, if I'm repeating things that you've all heard. But because of that really stringent look at the budget and how we manage it, that means that's why these kinds of things are coming out. And what it means is anything that's a project and an idea and a notion will be held in a kind of pen like that, but we need to remove it from the budget in order just to do the things that we need to do for the MTFS period. So it doesn't mean the idea has gone away altogether, although it is really challenging at the moment to be, we can't deliver it at the moment. There isn't the finance to do that. And I think, as I said last year, there isn't, I think, a borough in the land, or if there is, there may only be one. But I'm not sure there's even one that's running a nursing home at the moment. And there are real reasons for that. They're about the market and about the structures for how social care and nursing care is delivered in this country. We could have long and lengthy debates about that. But that's our reality, unfortunately. So it is really painful and sad. But you're right. There is a positive, which is that site is used at the moment and is making a big difference to some people's lives, and that's vital. My understanding is that theoretically that work that carries on that site until about 2026. That was put as a spec alongside that. At that point, the Osborne Grove nursing home site, I like all the sites that are really important to us, we're always, as a local authority, going to be looking for opportunities to do things with them. I really hope that by then we've got some answers to what the future of social care and nursing care might look like, and that might help us take our special project out of the pen, refresh it. But if not, there'll be, I have no doubt, real positive uses going forward on that site, but it's not something I have sight of. Maybe Joe wants to talk about, we haven't met with the group yet, but maybe Joe wants to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I met with Councillor Dustinez to talk about the letter that went out to all of the people involved. I think it's really important that we meet and communicate with them. I think we talked a bit about who we'd want to come along to that meeting, because obviously the future of that site isn't all with social care. We are one critical player, clearly, but one of many. So I think we'd like just a little bit of time to think about, to navigate through who needs to be there, to have a really useful and purposeful meeting, rather than to bring people together to not bring them any news at all, really. So hoping early in the new year we'll meet up face to face and have a bit of an update at that meeting.
Okay, thank you. I haven't got any questions on the financing bit, because obviously that line's just been removed. I think Councillor Donovan's asked the question about what the future looks like, and I think you've given us that honest answer at the moment. I don't know why. I was thinking February you were meeting up with that group, but maybe I've just got that date in my head. I'm not sure why, but that date's sitting there for in an email somewhere. Is there anything else on Osborne Grove around that removal on the capital project? Okay, so we're moving on to the Wood Green Integrated Care Hub. So that has also been removed. There's a line in the papers that this was an NHS-led project and the NHS decided not to proceed with the scheme, so the council contribution will no longer be required. I did bring this up at JOSC because we had a finance meeting, so I asked why. We're talking about working collaboratively. So I've put a question out, just so you know, so there should be a written answer back around the funding part of that and why the decisions were made in a bit more detail. But are there any questions specifically on the actual withdrawal, except it's a real shame that it's not going ahead. So the locality hub scheme cost has been lower than expected, so the budget can be reduced. So I just wanted to know, is this because we haven't got two in-person sites yet? We've only got one in the east we've got an actual physical site for, and actually will this change once we get one in central and one in the west? Because my thoughts, we would then have to put some money into that, but I'll just question on that.
I'll pick that one up. So that one specifically relates at the moment to the neighbourhood resource centre. So that was there are costs protected within the overall budget to deliver that scheme, and that's actually gone out to consultation on Tuesday. So I would invite councillors to have a look at the consultation and engagement on Neighbourhood Resource Centre. What we had was there was an amount within the budget to think about what other hubs may be required and whether capital works would be required as part of that. However, given the council's financial position, the position on that is that we would need to look to provide that within existing council space so that there wouldn't need to be further capital investment, because that will also then deliver a revenue saving on the reduced borrowing. So this does still keep the Neighbourhood Resource Centre scheme in delivery, but it does take out capital that wasn't earmarked for spend, and therefore at this point has been removed from the budget.
Just that you're going back out to speak to that co-production team, that group that were involved, and that's welcomed. The Wood Green Integrated Care Hub, I'll note that the NHS funding was pulled, so unable to move forward on that. And the locality hub, we've had a conversation tonight, and you know, a thought well, I suppose a hope around joining things up better when we are delivering services in other parts of the borough, and how we can include the locality hub in that so that we're not increasing the capital spend. Is that a fair summation? Okay, right. So moving on. Right, you'll be pleased to know. Oh, Councillor Donovan.
Sorry, I'm not sure whether this, because it's just a page just before, and it's just something very briefly about page 182 around the leisure centres and membership. And I know this is under the leisure portfolio, but obviously leisure and health aren't very far away, and it links back to some of the stuff that we've been talking before about supporting people and prevention. And there's a line in earlier that talks about supporting people at an earlier stage, leading to better outcomes with individuals and reducing costs to the council. And I'm thinking particularly about encouraging people who aren't exercising to exercise and to make better use of swimming pools and gyms, of course. I think we have there's a big possibility, a big potential in terms of us bringing those health centres back into leisure centres back into the council. But there is obviously a conversation, and part of it is in this budget, but I think there's going to be a longer conversation about cost of membership, discounts, how we're using discounts to encourage identifying people that we want to possibly there, 40, 50, not exercising at all. Maybe they're older, maybe they're young people, whoever it is. We want to encourage to become members of the gym and go to the gym regularly. And obviously there's an input from the health service in relation to this, because going to the gym is often prescribed by doctors. And I know that in some areas, the NHS will sponsor 2 months membership of a gym, and maybe they will be bringing that here under this new arrangements. But obviously I think what we would probably want is for people to go to gyms more regularly. So in terms of the conversation, obviously it will be done by the leisure services, but it's really how much the health and well-being service can have an input into that, and certainly how we can maybe scrutinise it. Maybe a role made in the future. It could be a recommendation to have a joint meeting between that scrutiny board and this scrutiny board to talk about the potential for these for the leisure centres, and how we can use membership and encourage people, and how local councillors like ourselves can try to get as many people as possible to join. And simply in terms of finance, obviously the more people that we get to join, the more this it will help the funding situation of the council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I note that is in a different area, but I also note that when we looked at leisure services being brought back in-house, there was that health and wellbeing strategy that underpinned the rationale for bringing it in-house rather than going out to a separate provider. And I think that was weighted, wasn't it? So that it had that. So I think that, I know what you're saying, Councillor Donovan, and I think that's something we can put on our work programme for the future, but we obviously won't be commenting on their savings bit at the moment. So they'll be pleased to note. Thank you. Right. Okay. So moving on to page 193. We've got our savings tracker. So that's savings tracker 24-25. Brilliant. Okay, so there's rather a lot of savings on this for the tracker. So this is the ones that have been agreed previously. So we're looking at savings, hang on, sorry, for 20. So these were agreed last year, that these would be agreed to happen now. My comments in looking at them across the piece was there was rather a lot of amber in our savings tracker. And there were areas in particular that, I mean, some of them we were actually looking to make a 50% saving in some areas. I think the mental health service review, on the first page on 193. And then it said we would need to consider and negotiate commissioned contracts as action plan to mitigate shortfalls. So I think I was going to pick up on that one because I think it just sort of summed up for me whether you've got confidence that these savings will be actually delivered, bearing in mind that some of them are significantly outstanding. You know, as I said, over 50% of the savings are still yet to be made on this action tracker.
Thanks for the question. So I mentioned the change board earlier. So the change board, the category A project for at ASC is all of these savings actually. And what we do is regularly monitor, review and mitigate where performance is falling below expected rates. So we are very clear that it is a challenging target, but however, we are making all efforts to mitigate any sort of shortfalls in terms of pace and progress, which is outlined on the pages in front of you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take Councillor Brennan, then Councillor Harum. Thank you.
So 2 questions. Is the fact that they're still on amber, so they haven't actually been achieved yet, one of the reasons why we've got such a big shortfall? Is that impacting on our shortfall of money or not at all? Okay, and the second thing was, just moving straight on, timing wise, when do you expect these to be achieved?
So the answer to the first question is no. The current projections assume all savings will be delivered. Where we know that there are shortfalls in the rates of which we are taking forward, we are putting forward mitigations. So alternative to reduce the shortfall. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just wondered, when do we think that they will be achieved?
Sorry, can we go on the, yeah.
Sorry. So I can't say any more than the fact that we regularly monitor, we put in mitigating actions, and we still feel that by the end of the year, we will do our best to achieve the savings. I can't tell you 100% because it's a moving piece. Yes. Yeah.
And Beverly, is it fair for me to say that what we might see is we might see some areas overperform or perform, and others might underperform, and that might be part of mitigations. You might expect that.
Okay, Councillor Harum.
Yeah, mine is just about the figures. I'm just startled that everything is so rounded and everything is 50% or nothing. I just can't see how that is possible. How like, so if you go at every single line here, it's 50%. The amber ones are exactly 50% of the proposed savings. Is it because we are halfway through the financial year? How can the numbers can be so rounded like this? Yeah, that just. No.
Can you give me an example? Because I can't actually see if
so every single line. Okay, let's go line by line. Improve processes and practices to ensure that residents receive the right level of care. Proposed savings 850K. Projected full year savings 425, shortfall 425. What the next line, contact reviews, every single line, it's 50%.
Sorry, which page are you looking at? Because I'm looking at something different.
193.
Oh, sorry, I maybe we are not.
No, we are doing 193.
Okay.
Yeah, you're
are
correct.
193,
Yes,
right?
you're correct. Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
not seeing something.
No, you are
Am I accurate in my?
you are completely accurate. And having said it, it was like a light bulb. I was like, oh my goodness, yes, they are all 50%. I hadn't spotted that. So yeah.
it's just a curiosity to me that every single line is 50% or fully achieved, and I just can't see how. I mean, how is that possible?
As far as I'm aware, this is information provided by the service, so I can't comment on why it's just 50%.
I think it's just unusual that, so we've got first, second, not third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, those sort of 8 on the first page when you've got a total. So I'll just go on strength-based working, 350, and you said projected full year savings 175, savings to be made 175. So it's almost like it is literally half. I mean, the only times that changes in the grant reviews, and there's 2 others, use of public, health growth and transport, but the rest are on the first page are literally written as half of the. So I think what Councillor Haran's probably asking is actually, have you made that 50%, or are you hoping that you are around that figure? Because having spotted it's now sort of standing out.
The only comment I make is that an expectation that we will achieve 50% of the overall target. So hence that amber status. So we expect to, if the target for example, improved processes and practices, if the target was £850,000, we're expecting to only achieve 50% of that.
So maybe the question should be asked in a different way. Have you essentially downgraded the savings to 50% of what you initially proposed? Is that what this is saying then? Because then I'm really thoroughly confused.
I think we're going to have to come back to you because this presentation is not one I'm used to. So I have to apologize. I'm used to more, different figures, more detailed figures, not these approximations.
I mean, so can I suggest if this is going out to consultation, then is this, no, this is just for us.
This is last year.
Last year's savings.
24, 25.
All right. I don't know when this will come back to us to scrutinize then, because if the figures are not accurate, then we need to see the more accurate figures, isn't it? Because there is a material. Isn't it?
No, I'm going to say that I completely agree, and I accept that Beverly said that she sees different figures, in which case I think it's very correct that we as the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee see the updated figures in the more nuanced, so we can actually ask the pertinent questions. So what I suggest we do is we take the savings tracker to our December meeting with the new updated version, because we've still got our recommendations go to OSC. That's, that can be in January. So I think we can just take the savings tracker at that point with the figures in that, so we can ask those questions. We have got space on the work programme, so I suggest we put that on the work programme for our December meeting. Councillor Mason.
Quick ask, can we also have a date on it? Because I'm not quite sure what date the savings are meant to be achieved at and by. So are you giving us 6 monthly figures, which is why it's 50%, or can you give us as precise figures as you can for a date close to when we're going to, I don't know, maybe the end of November?
You mean like Q1, Q2?
Because
So if you
I don't know where the savings are going to be achieved by what date.
So if you say Q2 or Q4, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to stop this item here. Neil, is it all right if you come back in December to our December meeting? We'll arrange. Sorry, no, you very pleased to come back and see us again, won't you? Can I just check as part of this item, because this I struggled with this one, which was on page 197, the savings tracker 24-25. Neil, could you run us through what this is actually what this is saying? Because obviously it's saying something very clear, but I just didn't quite understand what you meant by this table. Thank you.
These are the savings that were approved as part of setting the budget for 24-25 that apply to 25-26 and beyond. So in setting the budget in March, these are the other savings that were approved as part of that process. So if you look at, for example, transitions, for example, part of that savings approval approved a multi-year set of savings. Year one is in the table above. So if you look at page 195, the last row, there's a consistent savings value of 673,000. That was approved in the budget setting process. But together with that, there was savings approved for 25-26 of 1.152, 777,000 in 26-27, 724,000 27-28, and 1.22 million in 28-29. So if we were going back this time a year ago, when we were actually scrutinising the savings proposals, you'd have seen these multi-year savings appearing as part of the process.
Yeah, I think I now see what you're telling us. Right, we've just got to flip back and line up and see which ones. So, okay, so transitions. So if we look at transitions at the bottom, so on the savings tracker that we're going to come back to on page 195, we've got in-year savings 24-25 of 673,000. And then you're saying that in 25-26, we've got another set of savings, 152,000. Sorry, 1.1 million in 25-26 in the transitions. Okay, so the bit that I'm struggling with then is because there's no information about what those savings actually so I can see in this one what the savings were. This is the project board in place, team recruited, young people identified, support the realisation of year one savings. That says how it's going to be done, and it's green, so it has been achieved. But I don't know what your savings of 1.1 million in transitions actually relates to. Are you now cutting something within the transitions project, or how's this working? Sorry.
Could I come in? I think what this is when we set out transitions, we said each year this amount would be saved. And so you should be getting a report that says how we're doing against this year, but then you'll also be being reminded that the transitions is supposed to deliver next year and the year after and the year after. So when you will have had the just like earlier on when we talked about day ops, there wasn't anything in the first year, but there was something in the second, third, and fourth year. Next year, when you were looking at the budget again, you'd have day ops, and you'd be like, well, there was nothing this year, but next year, the year after, thereafter. So I think that's what's being presented to you. So those are the savings that we set out last year, but they had multi-year they had savings for each year. So in essence, what you're getting is a picture of new savings we're making, and we've already discussed that we're not quite happy with the current how the savings is set out, and there's a bit of concern about what you've been provided with. But then the last thing you're seeing is a reminder of the other savings already set out for the coming years. Does that help at all, Chair?
Yes, it does. But I'm going to ask actually if this is brought back as well, but with some detail, because I completely hear what you're saying, Councillor Desneves, and that does make sense. But I'm looking back on the pack, And in some of the areas, there's nothing about what those savings were. So it's very difficult because these are savings that are now going to be coming up in 25, 26. And for us to scrutinise them, unless we have the memory, a couple of years ago, we're not going to be able to remember what was attached to those savings. I hear what you're saying about them being a repeat, but I think we do need to understand what they actually mean as part of the pack. So I'll just request if that comes back with what those savings actually mean in that respect, if that's okay. Thank you.
Might I just politely suggest, Chair, what we do is we take what was presented to you last year and we somehow show that in a way as a kind of reminder, this is what we said last year, and then here's the multi-year.
So there will be records in minutes and all the reports from previous scrutiny sessions. So we can generate those from Democratic Services.
Yeah. Thank you. Otherwise, I think it's going to be very hard for the panel just to look at those figures. I mean, we could spend a long time asking you to repeat each one of those and explain it in detail, but I think it's probably going to be a lot easier to have it as a report in the pack for the December meeting. Sorry, Neil, did you want to come in?
I was just going to suggest the same, that if we had that bit of extra detail to explain what those were, because obviously it's part of the memory that these were scrutinised last year. But obviously, we now got further savings that we're going to have to build into this year's budget. So yeah, we can provide detail going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Poku.
Yeah, what would be useful? I don't think it applies necessarily, but it's also, we're making savings that we've looked at the other proposals. If any of those savings were impacted on this one, so let's say we're looking to make a savings of 200, which we've seen, which we reviewed before. But then last year, we thought we could make 200 this year. Is it the same things that you're looking to save, or how does it relate to whatever we're budgeting for this budget, if that makes sense? I mean, it might not link, it might be different items, but just in case if there's any kind of overlap, if we can also understand that overlap as well, please. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll sum up some recommendations that we're making from the panel up to the point of the budget papers that we've scrutinised so far. So obviously I'll look to the panel to put the hands up and come in or suggest recommendations as we go through. So I think as a committee, we wanted to note the risk of the pressure to the council's budget about the pressures in adult social care at the moment. This year it's a 15.1 million, and I know that's an amalgamation of two years of pressure, but obviously that is a risk for the budget going forward. On page, sorry, at 12.12 on page 154 on the table, the additional forecast pressure. I've just made a very quick note here. I hear what you said, Neil, and I take what you said about the additional forecast pressure. I still got concerns though that we're putting it in at 930,000 in 26, 27. I do think, especially as I know what you said about the money and how that works from 15 down to that with the 6.5 million that we're already putting in, but we are then showing 7 million plus in the next years going up further. So I think for me that's a risk in sort of putting that amount at that point. So I think that's quite low. In the proposed savings, we've got a quite substantive amount of savings in adults and health in 26, 27 of 979,000. Again, I think in an area where we are looking, it's a huge area of impact on our residents, and a lot of it is statutory. I know there are other areas that aren't, but I think again that sort of